Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the fifth part of What If Deku Became Shigaraki's Obsession? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Delicate like porcelain glass. Warm like a spring, soft and smooth like silk, beautiful like the loving angel on a rooftop on a rainy day. A killer held his resting hero, careful and quiet to not wake him. He watched him in silence. They both laid on their sides with one in the other's arms, illuminating minty hues peacefully gazed down through the dim lighting twilight provided through the window. Both were nearly encased in a nest of blankets in the center of the floor. Their clothes had been lost somewhere amongst them. They laid in near silence, only the sounds of a light wind that would rustle tree leaves and bushes, and the sweet even breathing of the sleeping hero. Midoriya had his head resting on the side of Todoroki's head, occasionally shifting his fingers through his hair, smiling softly at him as he did so. No tears this time, he quietly giggled, peeking through the strands over his hero's eyes. Every time Todoroki had fallen asleep, without fail, his nightmares and his sadness would overwhelm his unconscious state. This was the first time Midoriya had seen him in such a serene bliss. Just sweet dreams, the killer hummed. My Shochan deserves the sweetest of dreams. He kissed his forehead and then brought Todoroki's head closer into his chest. He let out a long, deep sigh in comfort, having waited for a moment like this for months. He then blushed at the feeling of his beloved nuzzling in closer. He giggled hushedly in a type of accomplishment. How long had he been in this house? Longer than an hour. Maybe 2. To have this kind of time with 2 ignorant people still in the mansion was a blessing. It wouldn't last. Midoriya heard scratching at the door and very quiet whines, muffled by the wall. It wasn't the kind of whines of a lonely dog, but rather a worried one. Someone was coming. The little villain sat up quickly, yet carefully enough to keep Todoroki undisturbed. He dug around for their clothes in the messy nest of blankets, finding his own as well as the others. He draped the UA gym uniform jacket over Todoroki's back before getting up and getting dressed in a timely manner. He then heard a whined bark from behind the door. Yeah, Endeavor's voice mumbled, yet he was loud enough to hear. Should-o-dash? Endeavor opened the door to Todoroki's room, letting Zuzu trot inside. The man looked side to side, examining the room, not expecting the lights to be off or for his son to be on the floor in blankets. The gym uniform poking out near his neck gave the impression that he was still dressed. He would never check the closet for a hiding infamous killer peeking through a crack. Protective eyes would watch the pro's every move, desiring nothing more than to kill the man and steal his son away forever. He was his now. The bruised bite at the back of his shoulder blade was proof of it. He expected Endeavor to shout, to wake him, to argue with him. However, he became baffled by his gestures. Awkwardly and politely, Endeavor placed a bowl of soba on a desk in the corner of the room by the window. Fuyumi said you didn't come down for dinner? Did he not understand that Todoroki was asleep? Midoriya hoped he wouldn't wake him. I don't want you trying to fast again. And we can work on your fire during your internships? Couldn't be friendly for too long, could he? Endeavor barely spared Todoroki a glance when he went back to the entrance of his room and just stood there. It looked like he wanted to say something, but became frustrated by not being able to come up with the words. I get why you may not want to talk to me. But you need to keep away from that boy. The sneaking out and being gone for days at a time isn't good. He wasn't even looking at him while talking, but his eyes narrowed as he looked off at the floor. I can see your brother in you. I can't have you turning out like him. You need to stay focused on your future, and you can't progress if you're afraid of your fire. He wasn't afraid of it. He hated it. It all started with the sneaking out with your brother. God knows what he started doing out there unsupervised. You're better than that, Shudo. And I know you're better than what you displayed today. Endeavor left after that, shutting the door behind him without trying to be all that quiet. It was Midoriya's cue to leave the closet and sigh. Had Todoroki been awake, an argument would have definitely taken place. The little villain scoffed at the thought of the pro trying to defend his actions. "Don't listen to him, Sho-chan," he whispered, kneeling down beside his hero and leaning down to kiss his lips softly goodbye. He expected him to sleep through the kiss, unaware that he had actually woken him up, his eyes cutely blinking open as the villain was walking to the door. "Izuku," Todoroki mumbled, realizing quickly that his beloved had to go. He wished he could stay forever. Yet his sleepy self felt the need to reach out to him with one hand, laying on his side and exposing a bruised mark on the back of his shoulder. Midoriya looked back from the door, appearing awestruck by the boy behind him. Such a beautiful hero reaching for him, a twinkling glow in the twilight light in his blue eye, and a loving smile on his face. No half-smile or smirk. A loving, infatuated smile. "I love you," Todoroki said so softly, making the little villain blush and then grin sweetly back. "I love you," Midoriya said back, waving shyly goodbye to his boyfriend and the little puppy that was snuggling up to his chest. When he left the room as silently as he could, he would escape out the nearest window as stealthily possible and retrieved his shoes from under the bushes in the front garden. He left the property, thus leaving Endeavor completely ignorant of the intrusion of his home. "I'm home," Midoriya called out when he entered Kurogiri's bar, opening the door and taking off his shoes before taking more than a step inside. "You did good today, allow me to do the same for you." A man walked past him, lightly patting his shoulder once before walking out the door. Midoriya recognized the man from once before. Jiren, Shigaraki's info broker. He noticed him leaving with a photograph in his hand and a confident snarky grin on his face. The door was shut behind him. "I take it things went well?" Shigaraki had come down the stairs with father in hand and turned at the doorframe. Midoriya poked his pointer fingers together and blushed, trying to think of a way to explain what he had done that day. His older brother scoffed before smirking. "Don't worry, I know exactly what you just did." It was like watching the boy's head exude steam while glowing red with wide, panicked eyes. How would you know? You were here all day." There was no way Shigaraki would know. There was no way he saw anything, right? He couldn't have. He wouldn't have. And yet he seemed so confident. The little villain watched him run his hand through shaggy blue locks on the side of his head and go to sit down at the bar in his usual seat. He patted the seat next to him where Midoriya would always sit. Always at his right side. Midoriya gulped and sat next to him, tapping his fingers on the wood countertop awkwardly. "How was the mission with Akaguro?" Shigaraki asked, taking out his phone to scroll through the news. He was specifically looking at Hosu City, Tokyo News, and smirking at one of the headlines. Media crews were annoying, but boy did they work fast. "Have fun." Somehow it felt like he was asking about something else with that second question. "The mission WS." Midoriya began to answer before shaking his head, letting the embarrassment leave him. This was his big brother he was talking to. He could talk to him. His green eyes sparkled as he looked at him enthusiastically, proud of the work he had done that afternoon. It was amazing. Master Akaguro's quirk is incredible. The moment Ingenium turned the corner to the alleyway, his life as a hero was over. Stain had cut his cheek, a harmless little scratch. The pro stood frozen after his blood had been licked, allowing the masked doctor make his move. He had taken a step forward, keeping one foot in front of the other as he brought his hand over hand in front of himself, and then raised them both above his head, allowing the wires from his metal-tipped gloves to flurry above. They came down, wrapping tight around Ingenium's neck, his wrists, his ankles, and his torso, making him appear as a lifeless doll on display. Stain went ahead, completing the job he had wanted to complete, stabbing his blades deep into his legs, twisting and pulling them out and taking blood and tissue out with him. He immobilized him as a hero, paralyzed him as a simple man. And then Stain had gone in front of him, sticking his bloodied sword in his mouth, but cutting nothing in a threat to keep him still as Midoriya did his work on his quirk. It had been a lovely learning experience for him. And afterward? Shigaraki smirked, listening to Midoriya recall his experience. He made the little killer blush again, though he placed a hand on his head with a pinky up. "I know you went to go see your Prince Charming." Midoriya nodded slowly, staring down at the countertop. "I snuck into his house and He couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. Did you moan? Shigaraki snickered as his little brother made an ungodly shrieking cry as he was then attacked with a flurry of weak punches to his side. He did know exactly what they did after all. I did not. Not. You jerk. Midoriya continued to hit the older villain with rage and embarrassment taking over him all over again. Even if the question was horribly humiliating, he knew he was just teasing. Shigaraki was just a brat who thought romance was gross. No one that immature would ever understand. You totally did. Shigaraki pointed at him with a mocking, keeping his tone calm and playful. He was fully aware of how much of an asshole he was being. Did not. This would continue for 2 full minutes. Kurogyari would eventually come out of a back room to place food on the counter for both the arguing children. Could you both save this for later, please? He asked, cutting their argument off as Midoriya had stood up on his stool and was holding the collar of Shigaraki's shirt with both hands. All while the other just kept his fist to his own cheek, smirking at the little villain evilly, one leg resting over the other. Midoriya looked to Kurogyari, biting the inside of his cheek in a pout before sitting down to eat. Not like someone who's never kissed anyone would know. The little villain mumbled under his breath as he took his first bite. The comment made Shigaraki flinch. Their argument was not over. Kissing's fucking gross. And I would still know, the older villain huffed, but something in the younger one sensed otherwise. The way he answered was a bit strange. He was never really one to boast how smart he was, rather he would just wait for the time to arise to prove himself and show off. You don't know the first thing about love, do you? Midoriya smiled as he drank from a cup. The look on Shigaraki's face was all he needed, though it was more like he looked the other way. You only know what you do from subplots in video games, you freaking shuttin'. He watched him shiver, like his words stabbed him in the back with embarrassment. He knew just as much as a 13-year-old, if not less. That's enough, Izuku. Kurogyari interrupted. The sudden words from the dark fog villain made Midoriya blink. He wasn't stern or sharp, it was a rather polite request for him to stop. It didn't seem fair with how much Shigaraki had teased him. But perhaps there was a reason behind it if Kurogyari was the one to stop him. Shigaraki, how long do you predict it will take Jiren to find Endeavor's first son? He then turned his attention to the older brother. Strange how he called Midoriya by his first name and Shigaraki by his last. Was he still trying to keep a distance between them? He's in the area and there are cameras around the stadium to see where he was headed. I don't think it'll take him longer than a week. Shigaraki answered. He took out his phone again to look at coverage from the sports festival. I'm going to go find him myself when he's been tracked. I need you here in case our Prince Charming needs an emergency place to stay. And one of us needs to be here to take care of this little Noah. He lightly bonked Midoriya on the head, receiving an annoyed grumble in response. I don't know how long it'll take to get on this guy's good side though. He imagined that it wouldn't be that simple. I recommend refraining yourself from threatening to kill him, Kurogyari suggested. The next school day proceeded most peacefully with afternoon training being cancelled for the Hero Corps students to come up with hero names. And thus the General Studies course would write evaluations from their experience at the sports festival. Midoriya was pleased to find that his notebook was neatly written in by the clone and what it had observed. The real one was able to write a very well-written paper of his observations of everyone's quirks. Though, he noticed at the bottom over every page that there were little notes of how the stadium just looked like a dogfighting ring where people were watching teenagers beat each other senseless for entertainment and to be judged by heroes. Midoriya was grateful that he didn't have to be there to watch. Looking further into his notes, he was impressed to see that Shinso had made it to the third event, but didn't make it past the second round. A few heroes requested me to intern at their agencies. I'm really surprised, Shinso said, walking beside Midoriya on their way to the cafeteria for the lunch period, looking at a sheet of paper that consisted of lists of hero agencies. The little villain tried not to roll his eyes. But seeing the tired boy so pleasantly honored by the positive attention, he almost felt bad for him. Heroes just wanted him to make their hero agencies look better. Do you know which one you're going to pick? Midoriya asked, at least curious as to what his classmate was thinking about. I was going to talk to Mr. Yamada to get a second opinion. He said he really wanted us to think about it over the next 2 days. They were being given 2 days off to thoroughly research and choose where to intern. Midoriya only saw it as more time to spend with Todoroki and more time to work with Stain. The two students separated into different lines for food once they reached the cafeteria. While the little villain was still in line, he noticed Shinso go to sit by himself by the windows. He noticed that he had always been sitting there since the first day of school. Though this time on his way there, someone lightly tugged the back his blazer. Even though he had such a gloomy resting face, a boy that emitted sunshine was beaming to see him. He watched the boy with a lightning bolt in his hair stay behind Shinso as he kept turning around. Whenever he turned, Kaminari would stay right behind, going in circles a few times before jumping out in front of him playfully. It was harmless fun rather than a tease. Midoriya couldn't hear what Kaminari was saying, but he saw him pointing with his thumb to a table where Bakugo, Kirishima, Siro, and Ishido sat. There were 2 empty spaces right next to each other. He watched Shinso follow the blonde to the table, looking awkwardly at the floor like he was too anxious to make eye contact with anyone. Midoriya made a small shrug with a smile seeing the misunderstood student be invited to sit with a group. It gave him a few thoughts. Though, they would have to be stored away for later as he was more looking forward to meeting his beloved hero outside under the tree. Todoroki was there first, sitting back against the tree with his food in the grass beside him. It appeared that he had been spacing out while staring at his left hand. But he would quickly be interrupted from his thoughts when a freckled killer leaped into his lap, his face taking the place of his left hand. A face of confusion and anxiety quickly vanished at the sight of the adorable smiling face of his significant other. The smaller boy was giggling and hugging onto his torso as he playfully kicked his legs in the air like a child. He was just so happy to see him, to be with him, and to hold him again. Midoriya would feel 2 arms wrap around him and hug onto his back, bringing him all the more closer. Shochan, Midoriya sang cutely, kicking his feet in rhythm of tilting his head side to side. How he wanted to tell him that he was so close to finding his big brother. It was the last thing they needed at this point. The 2 students had never been closer romantically. Todoroki was on good terms with both Kurogiri and Shigaraki without even having their proper identities, and his relationship with his father and the heroes was only getting worse. The little villain was undeniably eager for him. "I want to take a peek," he mused, leaning up a bit and using both hands to shift the collar of Todoroki's shirt and blazer. "You're lucky we didn't have training today," Todoroki mumbled, looking off yet tilting his head to let the killer on his lap get a look at the bruise on his shoulder. Someone could have seen. How embarrassing that would be. Though Midoriya stole a quick peck on the lips and put his clothes back in place. "The old bastard would probably kill me," the little killer hummed. He didn't seem all that worried about it. He soon got off of Todoroki's lap and would pick his food up from the grass to start eating it, as they would then eat together. "We got 2 days off, right? Then an internship?" he asked, curious about what his schedule was going to look like for the next week or so. He watched Todoroki nod slowly as his eyes became a bit spacious once again. He could tell he's had quite a bit on his mind. "I have little doubt Endeavor has already sent in a fake acceptance letter to the school. He wants me interning at home no matter what," he started. Midoriya's cheery mood appeared to drop. Would Todoroki be restricted from seeing him right after they were allowed to spend time together from Shigaraki? That wasn't fair. "He can't keep me locked in the house. But I'll need an excuse that Fuyumi would approve of. Why couldn't she just cover for him regardless? What was she so worried about him doing? And at the festival, when my fire came out," he spoke slowly and softly. "I was only thinking about my mom. When I think about the time your mother took me into her apartment and..." He looked down at himself, placing his hand over the center of his chest. His ribs. "A man who kept me alive long enough to be rescued," he was talking about his son, and when I think of all that, I just wonder if I could maybe have that for myself again. At least one person. "You want to see your mom," Midoriya concluded. Todoroki didn't say it outright, but he didn't have to. His beloved knew exactly what he wanted. What he probably needed. Midoriya watched Todoroki nod, but the hero student looked so anxious. He just looked to the killer sitting next to him, silently waiting for him to say something. He was unsure. "I think it'd be good for you." How about I go with you? I don't have to go into her room, but I can just stand outside. We could go on a date right after, yeah? Midoriya told him sweetly. And suddenly Todoroki didn't seem so nervous anymore. I'd like that a lot, Todoroki mumbled before eating a piece of meat with chopsticks. If the meeting went well, Midoriya was sure that Kurojirai and Shigaraki could give him access to his mother, even as a criminal. If it went poorly, he would have more of a reason to cling to the villains, whether it be his older brother or Kurojirai. The little villain was sure to make any outcome work in, not just his favor, but his heroes as well. He just had to trust Shigaraki to do his part wisely. When Midoriya returned home that evening, he was a bit surprised to see Shigaraki dressed a bit differently than normal. He wore a black hoodie with a red undershirt with gray pants and his usual red shoes. Instead of his father, he wore a black flu mask that was under his chin at the moment, and over his shoulder was a red messenger bag. At first glance, he looked like a normal college student. Midoriya took his shoes off at the door and looked to Shigaraki a bit curiously. "You're leaving sooner than I thought," he commented. "Jiren found him sooner than I thought," Shigaraki said back, scrolling through his phone and then putting an earbud in. "I'm traveling there myself, so Kurojirai is going to stay with you?" It would have been quicker for Kurojirai to warp him, but there was probably something he could learn by walking there himself. He could see where this guy likes to linger, see what places he probably visited, find a motive for being where he is, but he would come across as less threatening going alone. "I'll be gone for a few days. Don't miss me too much," he smirked and shrugged. "I won't," Midoriya snarked, walking past him to grab a snack from the bar counter. Shigaraki didn't think much of the little villain's response. He flipped his hood up and adjusted his bag to start heading to the door. "Be careful though," he then heard his little brother say. It made him twitch with cringe at the nickname, as he glanced back to see Midoriya watching him from the corner of his eye. He looked a little worried. He would miss him. And the next morning, Midoriya would realize how much he did miss his older brother figure. He had grown so accustomed to eating breakfast with him in the morning, teasing and making fun of each other. The bar felt so much emptier without him there. He liked to peek at the papers he was always going over, or sneak over his shoulder to see what was on his phone screen. He liked to lean against him when he felt sleepy, but not tired enough to go to his room. The villain he had met by chance in the alley one night, the one he had feared for a moment after discovering his quirk and his desensitization to killing, had become one of the closest people in his life. He was able to give this little schoolboy a purpose, skills, a teacher, a place to stay, and the opportunity to become close to a hero he had admired since a fateful day. He had little doubt that he could convince anyone lost out there to join his party. With that in mind, Midoriya readied himself for a day away from school. He met Todoroki around the corner from his mansion, so he didn't have to go far alone, though he wasn't all that alone with Zuzu by his side. They shared a kiss and would hold hands as they traveled across the city, taking a train. The train was quiet for the middle of the afternoon on a workday. Zuzu stood by Todoroki, her paws up on the back of the seat, her tail wagging, watching the outside world move by so fast. Her owner had watched her for a few minutes before leaning his head on Midoriya's. "You nervous?" the little villain asked. He felt the other nod, so he reached up to run his fingers through his hair. No matter how this turned out, he would be there for him. "Ida's brother got really hurt during the festival," Todoroki breathed. The sound of Ida's name was enough to make the little villain's eyes go bright red. But he would not snap. He proceeded to keep brushing the other side of his head with his fingers. "He's really upset about it, but he's not telling anyone. I'm worried about him." "Stop talking about him. Forget about him. You're with me now. You're mine. I heard my father talking about Ingenium, about his condition. He said he'll probably be out of hero work forever. It must be hard on his family. Who cares about them? They were just mooching off of him anyway. They don't care about him, just how much money he was making and how popular he was. It got me thinking about mine too. No wonder he was thinking about his mom. There were so many triggers for it. You said you didn't remember much about your oldest brother. Do you have the same problem with your mom?" Midoriya asked, trying to change the subject at the first chance he had. He felt another nod. "I remember her crying a lot. And recently some things have been coming back." He and Shigaraki appeared to have a similar problem with memory. They had repressed so much to the point where they hardly remember anything. She was supportive but afraid. I don't want her to be afraid of me. That was what he feared most. The hospital staff was shocked to see Todoroki signing in to see his mother. He had never visited her before. It was a surprise to see him now. It was even more shocking that it was after something as massive as the sports festival. Midoriya took the liberty of taking Zuzu in his arms and carrying her to keep her off the floor and from anyone tripping over her. The two teenagers took the elevator to the 3rd floor after signing in. There wasn't any talking between them. The hallway seemed so long when looking for the room number. 315. Todoroki stood at the door, only staring at it for a few moments while Midoriya held Zuzu almost like a child. We'll be right here when you're done, okay? We passed a cafe on the way here. We can go there on our way back. The little killer smiled with his eyes shut, looking as pure as he ever had with a puppy in his arms. Todoroki looked back to them and nodded with a very subtle gulp. He turned to hug Midoriya and put a hand on Zuzu's head. He had never been the one to initiate hugs. Midoriya sat with his back against the door, holding Zuzu in his arms. It had been a while, an hour at least. Things were quiet, so it must have been going well. There was no screaming, no shouting, no sobbing to be heard from the outside. Zuzu, who had been very keen on sensing anxiety and distress, was relaxed as her chin rested on his shoulder with her nose pressed against the door. Think they're doing all right in there? Midoriya asked, patting her back. She was so calm compared to how she appeared at the mansion. Paranoid, fur up, being skittish at every corner, panting from stress, constantly clinging to Todoroki's side. Even at the hideout, she paced a lot. She was always wandering, sniffing, trying to investigate every corner. He wondered if she could sense how many people had died in the underground lab. Could she ever smell the blood on him? Did it bother her? But here, she seemed so calm in his hold, closing her eyes and her ears dropping. His mom must be very gentle if you're like this. Zuzu was a stressed-out puppy, probably having gone through a lot. No wonder Todoroki wanted to keep her so badly. After quite a bit more time, Zuzu's ears perked up and Midoriya could feel the door rumble a bit. He stood up to see Todoroki coming back out, taking a moment to look back and wave. "Goodbye," he said softly, coming out and shutting the door behind him. When it was closed, he just stood there, staring at the floor. But he appeared to have the smallest smile on his face. It made the little villain beam. "You're smiling?" Midoriya giggled, approaching him and using one hand to hold the other's cheek and raise his gaze. "I love it when you do." He gestured his head for them to start walking back. "So how was she?" They both walked side by side. A lot less tension was between them now that the stressful part was over. "She was great. She cried but she was happy. And I was too," Todoroki answered. Midoriya wondered if he had cried too. He could be quite emotional when he really wanted to be. "My brother and sister have been seeing her for a long time. It was like she was just waiting for me. I feel bad that it took me this long. But you did it. And you had your reasons." The last thing Midoriya wanted him to feel was guilt. He had done so well to work up the courage to do this. "I'm proud of you." Not anyone would have the strength to do that. Oops. The moment he said he was proud, he watched a flame appear on his hero's red hair to which he began to pat out with his hand lightly. The blush on his face was pretty cute to see. This usually happened when he was embarrassed, but it was more intense when he was angry. It made the little doctor curious the more he thought about as they walked. He had let Zuzu down outside for Todoroki to take her leash, but Midoriya didn't catch himself staring. Quirks were physical abilities, but were some linked to other things? Like emotions? He'd have to see how the quirk functioned. Probably veins. Maybe a type of fuel or energy the body produced that was separated down the middle. Maybe the source was the heart rate, but the heart reacts to all emotions in a similar way. It was probably the brain then. What chemicals would be in the body to produce ice and fire? It could control the whole body temperature, so how would it be able to spread the power to the other side? He'd have to look inside. "Izuku," Todoroki said, blinking once at Midoriya in wonder. "Huh?" The little doctor snapped out of his thoughts. "You were staring. Is something wrong?" He was looking at him like that again. And no, just overthinking. "It's all right." He was looking at him like a subject on his table. His eyes had been darting to different parts of his hero's body. His hands, his chest, his neck, his head, and his stomach. He wanted to deny it, but he was starting to fantasize about the inner workings of his beautiful quirk. The little villain only watched the ground as a drop of sweat made its way down the side of his head. He didn't want to think about it. He just wanted to forget everything he was just thinking about. Even as they stood in line together at a cafe, he couldn't bear to look at him again. The risk of that thought process making its way through his head again was too disgusting to tolerate. He felt gross. Appalling. He began to scratch at his wrists, wanting to rip through his terrible skin. Zuzu put her front paws on his leg but turned her head to see someone else. "Well, aren't you two enjoying your day off? Didn't think I'd find you both all the way across town though. Such a loud peppy." Midoriya instinctively put his hands in his pockets but was stunned to see his homeroom and English teacher right behind him and Todoroki. Yamada had his arms folded with a toothy grin on his face. His hair was down with the front ends tied in a bun. He wore regular rectangle glasses, casual clothes with a leather jacket, and had a pair of headphones around his neck. Seeing him out of costume, but also out of formal clothes, was a bit off-putting to the students. It was a little awkward seeing their teacher out of school at a cafe. "What are you two getting?" "It's on me," but his heart was always in the right place, as big as ever. Both the teenagers looked to each other and shared a look of soft approval. However, just as they were ordering, Midoriya smirked to Todoroki. He knew his boyfriend well enough to know he didn't sneak out on planned dates without Endeavor's credit card. They lived to make his pockets hurt. The moment Yamada was about to pay with his own card, Midoriya clapped his hands together. "Oh wait, actually. I changed my mind." The clap was enough to take Yamada's attention away for just a moment. Todoroki lightly tapped the side of Zuzu's hind leg with his foot as he pointed to the card in the teacher's hand. They must have played this game before with Endeavor. She scampered up to the blonde and got on her hind legs and snatched the card from his hand. "No, that's not a toy." She didn't really steal it as she just sat down next to Midoriya, letting Yamada turn his back to Todoroki for a brief moment. "Add a large vanilla ice cream, triple what he was getting, and a dozen cake pops." Todoroki told the cashier quietly and swiped Endeavor's card just as Yamada got his back. The poor girl behind the register looked terribly confused but got the scheme the two teenagers were trying to pull. She repeated the initial price and didn't ready the card machine when the pro hero went to pay. It left Midoriya snickering to himself and Todoroki holding his puppy, petting her head in pride. Sitting down at the table together, Yamada was hopelessly confused by how much they had. He didn't remember ordering 4 coffees and a set of cake pops. But he refused the receipt at the counter so he couldn't check. And he wasn't about to cause a fast food employee the trouble because he wasn't about that life. "Does she always steal things like that? It's the puppy energy, right?" he asked Todoroki as Zuzu sat in his lap, enjoying her little puppy life with an ice cream all to herself. He didn't remember ordering that. "All the time?" Todoroki shrugged. Midoriya then suddenly giggled and pressed himself against his hero's side with a cute smile, both of them enjoying their coffee drinks. The two and Zuzu looked so innocent. They could be troublesome, one being full of energy around the other, and the other emitting a sense of serenity and peace when the other was around. They thrived off of each other. Yamada put his cheek in his hand, watching them with a heartfelt grin. "I won't tell anyone. But you're both more than friends, aren't you?" he asked outright. He could tell. He didn't have to ask. But he did find it funny when Midoriya had to lean up on Todoroki's shoulder to pat out the flame that sprung up on his red hair again as his face blushed. "Show-chan, your hair, you're doing it again," the little villain warned in an attempt to not set off fire alarms. He then turned to his teacher with a pure chuckle. "You caught us. We've been together since before that interrogation, but Endeavor would kill both of us if he found out." He was sure Yamada understood that. He soon sat down and leaned against Todoroki, taking a sip of his coffee. He thought back for a second, remembering that the two of them had become a couple the night Kosuka was killed. "Yeah, Shoyuta and I had a feeling." He was a bit worried that the lying would trip up the investigation. "But things have only gotten more complicated," Yamada had smirked, but his mood slowly dropped as he took another sip of coffee. He had ordered it black. Both the teenagers could see a bit of darkness under his eyes, although it was slight. Todoroki, you would know. You've probably been hearing OL Fireface yelling on the phone all the time. Midoriya looked to Todoroki to see him nod. Should Yamada be telling them this? He probably felt comfortable around Todoroki considering he was the son of the lead hero of the investigation. But Midoriya, he was his favorite. Is it not going well, Mr. Yamada? The little killer asked. The man looked so tired all of a sudden. Maybe even a little defeated. What kind of hours had he been working? His student heard in his last podcast that he was taking a hiatus to help in solving the crime, so he knew it was becoming a heavy task. Keep this between us, okay? It does involve you too because you're students and all. But especially you, Todoroki. Yamada's voice had become very quiet. He was definitely not supposed to be telling them any of this. But Midoriya was on the edge of his seat. He was going to hear how close his trackers were to his tail. Midoriya, you were pretty high on Endeavor's potential culprit list. But you've been removed completely since the USJ incident. You were in the observation room with me when that happened, so that masked guy couldn't have been you. To us. Shoyuta was stuck on how you acted during the tragedy. He was paranoid of how calm you were, but I knew you were just doing it for Todoroki. It was both. But Todoroki, Endeavor's looking at you now. What? Midoriya's hand tightly clutched the cup in his hand. He almost cracked the plastic. He could see a look of anxious shock in Todoroki's face from the corner of his eye. Our biggest lead is Kosuka. The detectives were already looking at you from the fight, you were front in the center during the tragedy, you didn't go home with your father that day, you avoided the interrogation, you've been away from home unsupervised consistently, and at the USJ, you were almost taken. And yet they spared you. You couldn't have been the one in the mask, but some suspect you're colluding with them. Yamada looked very upset when listing all of the evidence piled up against Todoroki. Midoriya's heart had fallen deep in his stomach. He thought he was going to be sick. To see his hero arrested for crimes that his boyfriend committed for him, he'd rather dive off a roof. But he was paralyzed with shock. You saw him yourself. And he almost died at the USJ. Midoriya raised his voice as he stood up but then realized he shouldn't be being loud. Todoroki sat still and quietly. That's what I've been trying to tell them all. At this point, it was your heroic action of saving Shoyuta that is saving you here, Todoroki. It would have made no sense for a villain to want to protect him. It was also the severity of your injury that came with protecting him that's protecting you. Who would have thought that Midoriya's mistake was actually saving Todoroki from the police? The only way to keep their eyes off of how it could be you, I'm focusing on what you couldn't or wouldn't have done. Yamada rubbed the side of his head with a sigh, then looked to Todoroki for any kind of response. I see why Fuyumi wanted to know where I was going today. He spoke in his typical tone of indifference and calmness. But all Midoriya heard was heartbreak. Sho-chun. His heart was breaking for him too. Do you think? Endeavor was trying to keep me home, to protect me? It couldn't be. He would do it to protect his image and to keep him away from his boyfriend. He wanted to keep him imprisoned to force his fire out of him. There was no fatherly love in that man. There was no way. I don't know, kiddo, Yamada said sadly. I know you're a good kid. Shoyuta thinks so too. I can't even describe how worried he was about you, even though he would never admit it. But the people on the case are getting frustrated and impatient, so they want to point to someone. So what's the evidence protecting him? Midoriya asked. What could he do to lead Endeavor's team somewhere else? How could he fix this? Like I said, Kosuka is our lead. The little villain noticed a very empty look on the ever-so-expressive Present Mix's face. That was the face of a man who's been looking at a dead body for too long. We suspect human experimentation. A lot of the team thinks Kosuka's lungs were burned in a fight for survival, like he was fighting right as he died. Yamada shook his head. I think someone's testing the extent of how far his quirk would go. Like testing the body's limits. We took DNA after we extracted and detained that thing the villains called a Nomo. That thing is a person, someone's body pumped with quirks to strengthen the human body beyond its limits. Midoriya stared in shock. He didn't take Yamada to be an idiot. But he didn't expect his deduction skills to be this impressive. Out of all the villains at the USJ, one never tried to fight. the one in the mask. He was either trying to hide his quirk to keep from being identified through quirk registration records, or he was quirkless. Midoriya finished the sentence for him. Yamada was right on his trail, a step behind, but he was close. Too close. You're focusing on finding the one in the mask, rather than focusing on the evidence against Todoroki. That's right. I think the identity of the one in the mask would fill in a gap as to why Kosuke was such a special kill. Because now he's been spotted working with the serial killer Stain. The mention of Stain made Todoroki's eyes flicker. Todoroki, you are close with Ida, Shoyuta and all might have vouched for that. I can't imagine you taking any part in, or aligning yourself with people who would cripple his older brother. Yamada then cracked a peaceful smile. It's really your kindness that's prevailing for you. A short while after their conversation was over that evening, Yamada waved goodbye to Todoroki and Midoriya happily, carrying the fourth coffee in his other hand. He probably needed it. But despite his exhaustion and depressing line of work, he kept a bright smile as his students brought him so much joy. Both the teenagers waved back to him with Zuzu standing between them. Though the smaller freckled boy had red in his eyes that were not from the sunset. Midoriya walked Todoroki and Zuzu home when their date had come to an end. They were just around the corner from the mansion when they shared a kiss that lasted a bit longer than most. Midoriya had even reached up to cup both of his hero's cheeks to bring him closer, to which the other would place his hands on his waist. I know it's bothering you. But remember what Mr. Yamada said. You're too kind to have done any of that. And he's looking out for you? Midoriya told him once they parted. He slowly let go of his face. Your kiss was sad just now. I wonder if Fuyumi told my mother anything about this. Todoroki took his hands back and looked down. And I worry if Fuyumi is afraid of me now. She probably wants me to intern at Endeavor's agency so he can keep an eye on me. I'd like to see my mother more often, but I don't know if they'll trust me to go alone. Midoriya brought him in by his precious face for another kiss. He hated seeing him so self-conscious. I know it seems like everyone was so quick to turn on you. But I'm always here for you, no matter what. You don't need them when I'm here, he purred between several kisses. He wanted to tell him that he could fix this. It didn't matter the cost. The moment Todoroki and Zuzu returned to the mansion, Midoriya quickly turned on his heel and took out his phone as he speed-walked down the city sidewalk. He tapped a contact and held the phone to his ear, waiting for the ringing to stop and for someone to answer. Dad, can you get a hold of Jiren? I need him to find someone for me. Shigaraki had been gone for 2 days. He left Kurojire's bar prepared with minimal necessities in his bag. It was evening and he was looking around, debating on whether it was worth crashing in a motel again for the night. Looking at his phone, he was getting a few texts a day on updates of where his person of interest had been spotted. It seemed like every time he reached the latest location, the one he was looking for had already moved. Every single place he was led to was a bar. He kept his earbuds in, walking by himself at his own moderate pace with his hands in his pockets. Maybe a little slower than most people. Walking past side shops and restaurants, he watched people from the corner of his eye. Teenagers on dates, families shopping together, groups of tweens causing a bit of mischief together, people smiling and enjoying themselves. How annoying, he grumbled to himself. He eventually found himself walking through a college campus in trying to take a shortcut to the next location. Maybe he would be able to catch his target by taking a shorter route. But he likely wouldn't be questioned as he was a similar age to everyone else who was there and he even had a messenger bag to complete the look. He kept to the side of the paved pathway, occasionally glancing at students that walked past him at the odd chance that one of them might be the person of interest. But he soon became annoyed at the sound of a rowdy group of boys his age as they walked in the opposite direction as him. They were taking up the whole path but he wasn't about to move for them. If they were halfway decent people, they would stay out of his way. Come on my guy, you gotta lighten up. Just one drink? A few girls? You're so uptight. You worried your parents are gonna find out? There ain't nothing like partying all night with the boys. There was someone in the middle being peer-pressured by the rest of the group, though it seemed he wasn't interested in what they were asking him to do. He shut his eyes when one of the others ruffled his white hair and pushed his head down. Come on guys. I got a girlfriend. And I gotta study for a test tomorrow. You're like, super smart, Natsuo. Take a break. As they walked past, not all of them made room for Shigaraki. One bumped shoulders with him a bit roughly. Hey, fucking Rudd dashed. The student looked ready to start something over it. How immature. How annoying. Shigaraki stopped and flexed his hand as he looked back darkly, terribly frustrated. Hey, don't. We're taking up the whole road here. Don't start shit over nothing. The one called Natsuo reached out of the group to grab the other by the shoulders from behind and pulled him back. He smiled awkwardly at Shigaraki, but he appeared genuine. Sorry for him. We should have been more aware of our surroundings. He apologized for him. Shigaraki lowered his hand slowly, returning it to his hoodie pocket. He closed his eyes and turned away, continuing down the path without saying a word. Natsuo watched him for a moment and sighed. Looks like he just had a rough day, or maybe that was just his face. Continuing on his way, it had gotten dark. Street lights were on and the city colors were brightly illuminating the streets. Yet his upcoming location was away from where the public roamed the city nightlife. Shigaraki turned a corner into a small side street, finding a neon sign for a discreet bar. He was about to go through the entrance when he noticed an alley right next to the door. He only spared a glance. But he swore he saw someone down there with a small cloud of smoke coming from them. Curiously, he took a step back and took a closer look. It was terribly dark and littered, tight, with a few trash cans and small balconies above and fire escapes. Hey! He called out not too loudly, but loud enough to be heard. He saw the figure of the person in the alley turn, noticing him. Is your name Tuya? Such a bright blue. It was such a beautiful shade. It was the most dangerous hue of fire. In the darkness of the alley, Shigaraki saw a flash of bright blue in the eyes of the person down the alley. Following the sight came a flurry of blistering flames. He quickly moved behind the corner of the alley, taking cover to not get burned. Blue flames, I found you, he hummed, going into his bag and quickly removing the flue mask and replacing it with his father. When the flames stopped, Shigaraki peeked his head around the corner. I'm not here for a fight, taught or dashed. He immediately took his head back at another wave of fire being sent his way. He watched the inferno singe the brick at the corner and at the wall that was taking the brunt. Such a violently intense quirk. How wonderful. He couldn't help but smile widely underneath the hand. When the attack stopped, he whipped himself around the corner, planning to take this head on. I just want to talk. But you're making that pretty fucking difficult. He saw a blue spark before another blast was sent his way. He bent his knees before jumping up against the wall and then hopping to the other, grabbing the railing of a balcony to pull himself up and over. There wasn't much time to break as bright blue hues locked on him from below, sending more fire his way up above. Long-range combat is such a pain. He grumbled, leaping to cling to the railing of another balcony. He reached to destroy sections keeping it to the wall and the stairs that connected it to platforms above. This let it fall to the ground with a loud and thunderous thud, causing a small dust cloud and forcing the fire user to dive out of the way. Just as he was regaining his footing, Shigaraki dropped down and landed almost cat-like before lunging up at him for the throat. In return, his target raised his hand to angle at his stalker's throat. By the time the dust cleared, they were face to face with their necks in each other's hands, left staring at each other with bright red and blue hues locked onto one another. Shigaraki was sure to keep a pinky finger up while the other kept a small flame to the back of his hand. It's Dobby. Some litter that was on the ground had become kindling for Dobby's flames, creating just a few dots of light as beautiful little embers rose above them for just a moment. It gave Shigaraki just enough light to get a look at the one in his grasp. Such a fucked up face. 3 piercings on his nose, almost looking like nail studs. Staples lined his jaw, formed a separate line down his chin, circled under his eyes, and many layered on his ears. He couldn't help but notice how much of his skin was purple, dead and burned as staples kept it from falling off. He had no earlobes. The burnt skin stretched down his neck, and who knew how much further it went as he could see the staples and burns on the back of his hands and going all the way down his forearms. Shigaraki found it strange how his clothes were so tattered, but also came off as being a bit too small, like they had been stretched, cut, and re-stitched poorly to adjust to his size despite being so lanky. His childhood picture showed white hair, and yet now it was jet black. You always try to kill people on sight? That was pretty fucking rude, Shigaraki grumbled, loosening his grip, but not letting go. One wrong move and he'd be ashes. Only if someone is a big enough prick to go out of his way to find me. I should kill you, you fucking creep. Give me a reason why I shouldn't. Defensive. Shigaraki sensed paranoia as Dabi's grip only got tighter. But this villain was not afraid in the slightest, smiling widely under that hand. I've got a little brother at home waiting for me to get back. Breathing suddenly became a bit easier, though it was subtle. There was a small narrowing of Dabi's eyes as he didn't respond. Got him. How about we get a drink? I got cash. Shigaraki began to pull his hand back and felt the other following his lead, though he noticed a bit of smoke coming from the ground. It was just a cigarette. They found themselves sitting next to each other in a dimly lit bar with some other suspicious characters lounging about. Some talked quietly amongst themselves, but everyone seemed to mind their own business. Shigaraki placed his bag beside him on the counter and paid up for a few drinks. He let the silence have its way with them for at least 15 minutes, watching Dabi gaze emptily at his large shot glass. He watched him down a few while he, himself, only got through one. He knew his limits as a lightweight. So you bought me a drink, are we going to fuck now or something? Dabi grumbled. Is that how you've been going about the last 8-ish years? Shigaraki asked snarkily. They both had such negative attitudes. Not surprising as they almost just killed each other. You don't fucking know me. The scrawny villain watched him down another shot before reaching into a back pocket for a box of cigarettes, lighting one with his finger after slipping it in his mouth. Smoking inside? You really don't have any manners. How troublesome. Todoroki's brother was going to be harder to negotiate with than he thought. He was just a stubborn brat in an adult's body. Well, someone interrupted me while I was outside. So you're gonna deal with it? Shigaraki rolled his eyes as he went digging his bag for his phone. It was buried somewhere under black spare clothes. You didn't come here to lecture me. So what do you want? How much do you fucking know about me? Such a foul mouth. How annoying. Not much. But enough. I'm just here to make an offer. The red-eyed villain placed his phone face up on the counter. He could see Dabi raise a brow to him as he took the cigarette out his mouth to tilt his head up and breathe out the smoke. It smelt terrible. I know your old man is a piece of flaming garbage. So I'm not about to turn you into him if that's what you're thinking. He saw his eyes narrow again. What are you dash? Dabi was about to ask something when Shigaraki tapped his phone for an audio to start playing. Answer me, Shudo. This rebellious phase is getting out of hand if you're starting to sneak out like this. I just wanted to get out. You never let me go out anywhere. I keep you here to keep you focused. I won't let you get distracted at such a significant point in your growth. Stop talking to me like I'm something. I'm not your masterpiece. Why can't you just drop that stupid ideology? Can't you see I'm just trying to give you the best future? There was a slam. I won't let you be a failure like your siblings. There was shuffling. They're not failures. Stop calling them that and say their names. Todoroki. Why is it so hard for you to listen, Shudo? Why can't you be a good parent like Mo-? There was fighting. A lot of it. Dabi was only able to listen to half of that fighting as it was meant to go on for at least a few minutes. His hand was resting on the table only to clench into a quivering fist. He couldn't tolerate 1 minute of this. Turn it off. Shigaraki obliged and paused the audio. Dabi got a glimpse at how much longer the audio had left to run. Where the hell did you get that? He asked lowly, downing another shot. Then another. It's not fabricated if that's what you're dash. Let me see your face. It was slight, but his words were beginning to slur together. The bright blues of his eyes were becoming a little hazy. A little empty. Shigaraki only sighed as he leaned back, slowly removing the hand from his face. This was for Midoriya and his little Prince Charming. If this is what it took to gain this Todoroki's trust, then it was easy enough. He placed his father on the counter and turned to Dabi. It's not fabricated if that's what you're implying. You heard him for a second, but that was my little brother that called yours name. They've become close and he wants to get him out of Endeavor's hands. He wants him dashed. I recognized that creepy hand from the news, that USJ attack. You want him to join your little team of criminals? Shigaraki was becoming annoyed with being interrupted. But he had to keep his composure for this to work out. He had more than just attention now. But he was halfway towards wasted, his head lolling to the side as he continued to stare at the phone with a shot glass still in his hand. So why come after me, huh? I'm not the son you're looking for. You're looking for Mr. Perfect? Bitterness? Maybe jealousy. Maybe it was a front. My brother asked him if he could have anything realistic in the world, what would it be? He said he wanted his family back. He specifically mentioned that he wanted to see his oldest brother again, thinking that there was no way he could have died. Well, he did die. He's shit out of luck. Another shot downed. He didn't die. He's a homeless alcoholic, stalking his dear old dad hoping to see him fail while he does nothing. The shot glass shattered as Dabi crushed it in his hand, shards of glass grazing his palm to make it bleed. A flame rose up on his cheek as he turned to Shigaraki, who was just glaring at him. But it wasn't a glare of anger or disappointment. It wasn't pity either. It was a challenge. I'm going to offer you the opportunity to make him fail yourself rather than sitting on your ass and watching from the stands. Dabi's nails dug into the counter listening to him. I won't out you to your little brother if that's what you want. You seem pretty sensitive to your real name. But I can give you a place to stay. A place to hide. You've kept a low profile with no known criminal activity. You can do whatever you want to make some money. My little brother has a knack for stealing cash and ATM cards from his subjects. A means of getting some new clothes. I'm building a team that will be strong enough to destroy everything I hate. I'm welcoming you to be a part of it. Even if Shigaraki couldn't get him to do it for Todoroki, maybe he could at least convince him to do it for himself. I could just tell little Todoroki that I'll do anything in my power to find his big brother. He never has to know. But you both could take down Endeavor together, he continued. What else could he offer? Shelter, money, food, safety, power? What else? I could let you visit your mother undetected. Forget it, Dabi answered, slowly getting to his feet. He was a bit wobbly. I've had enough of your bullshit. Enough of you and those fucking eyes of yours. His eyes? Shigaraki took his phone and put it in his bag, trading it out for a pen and notepad. He didn't walk around a city for 2 days to be told no. He didn't go through all the effort, all the snooping, all the records, Jiren, looking through crowds at the sports festival for nothing. Before Dabi could even begin to walk away, Shigaraki shoved a piece of paper into his hands. At least consider it when you're fucking sober. My place has something set up for you if you change your mind. Shigaraki snapped at him. And yet he was careful not to raise his voice to a shout. He watched Dabi take the paper and drunkenly look at it. It was a phone number. To which he then took out a severely cracked-up smartphone and typed in his number, sending a text to it right away. Unknown, I hate your eyes. Go fuck yourself. Then he burned the paper and let the ashes fall to the ground. He lightly shoved Shigaraki aside and went out the door with a slight hobble to his step. The red-eyed villain was left fuming, seeing the text on his phone and processing the conversation he just had to tolerate. But then he thought about it for a few moments silently, gazing down at the words sent to him. Why did Dabi bother sending a text at all? The 2 days of choosing an internship had passed. The internships were meant to last a week as hero students would reside at their hero agencies instead of attending school. General studies students had been spread out across multiple fields to study. Midoriya had chosen to work at a hospital that wasn't too far away from Kurogiri's bar, allowing himself to observe surgeries and professional doctors firsthand. However, thanks to Twice, the little villain could sneak away at any point to return to the hideout if he needed to. This was only necessary on the 3rd day so far. Despite almost all the students being gone, just as the bloody tragedy, one remained. The same purple-haired boy as last time. But he was no longer picking at grass in the field waiting for parents who would never come to arrive. Rather, he was in that field, getting lightly kicked in the stomach and knocked down on his backside, only to get right back up again. He wore a gym uniform as he wore a metal, almost threatening-looking, mask over his mouth and a gray binding cloth. A replica of Eraserheads. You're too direct. You don't give yourself the mobility to change your footwork. Try again until you get it right and we'll be here until dark if we have to. Aizawa instructed sternly. Anyone would have been disheartened or think that he was far too tough and strict. But Shinso only saw it as a challenge, just an obstacle to overcome to become the person he wanted to be. He was on his feet with a determined smirk that only made his tired face look a bit scary. Do you ever chill? Yamada had come outside that afternoon with 3 little boxes in his hands. He wasn't dressed in his hero outfit as there wasn't really a need to. Though he was in a kind of casual business attire with a red shirt and black cardigan, hair tied in a messy bun. You two have been out here for hours, how about we give the kid a break? He said with a big cheesy smile. Aizawa only sighed as he had Shinso on his back in the grass with his foot on his chest. We're not stopping until he gets it right, he said so coldly. Yet he raised his foot so Shinso could get back up and try again. Oh hush, I made your favorite this morning. Yamada sat down in the grass, placing 2 of the 3 little boxes down. They were bento boxes he had prepared that morning. He had also brought along an energy drink and a juice box as he kept a coffee for himself. You know as well as I do that you need to eat to keep up your strength. You're trying to beef him up, aren't ya? Aizawa eyed everything his companion had brought and narrowed his eyes. Time for a break, he muttered, removing his scarf casually and going to sit down with Yamada. Shinso only scoffed seeing how easily he gave in. He rolled his eyes before sitting down with both of them to eat what the pro hero, who apparently was also a pro cook, had prepared for them. Though he became silently flustered at what was in his. Really? Bunny-shaped apples? I'm not a kid, you know. It wasn't just bunny-shaped apples. The rice was shaped as a cute kitty with other fruits cut like flowers. He almost didn't want to eat it because a lot of work had been put into it. But it was also so embarrassing. Quit being such hardasses. You can't tell me you're both all rough and tough when you both go heart-eyed over any cat you find. Yamada whined, but he wasn't being all that serious about it. Yet he got some kind of enjoyment watching Shinso try not to make eye contact with him as he ate with a blushing face. If his parents weren't going to embarrass him with these kinds of things, then Yamada was going to do it himself. But he didn't watch for too long as he shifted his focus to a packet of papers he had brought with him. Working while you eat. Seriously? Aizawa grumbled. He was getting really sick and tired of Yamada working at all hours of the day. Couldn't he enjoy a meal without having to look at all that stuff? Yeah, I know you hate it. But I think I'm catching on to something here, you know? And I know you're going to yell at me, but can you and Shinso go home without me tonight? I have a lot of papers to grade from the sports festival. You two can get takeout and I'll get something on my way back. Yamada went to hand Aizawa the keys to the car when they were taken hastily. It was easy to tell that Aizawa was not happy. You better be back by 11 or I'm coming here and dragging you to bed. By your hair if I have to, he said bitterly. That's so mean. And it was around 9 o'clock that night when Shinso and Aizawa were sitting at kotatsu together, Aizawa pointing at parts of an open book that was on the tabletop. The two of them had been going over some techniques and mechanics involving the voice changer mask and the binding scarf he was given. Shinso diligently took notes while he spoke, taking in as much as he could. He was dressed in loungewear with his hair clipped back to keep it from getting in his face while Aizawa hadn't changed yet. He was still keeping his word on the threat towards Yamada. He wasn't getting changed until he got home. When 10 o'clock had come about, Aizawa shut the book having noticed Shinso's eyes were closing on him. He looked ready to fall asleep right where he Saturday. I think it's time you got some sleep for tonight, Aizawa suggested, standing up and stretching. We start early tomorrow, so I want you awake and ready. Shinso looked up at him and blinked sleepily, rubbing an eye with the ball of his palm. Okay, but you think Mr. Yamada will be back by 11 like you wanted? He asked before yawning and scratching the side of his head. He was having his doubts that the other teacher would make it back in time. He better be. The tired teacher folded his arms and looked out a window. Yamada better be back soon or he was going to be pissed. While he was watching for him, Shinso stood up and began dragging his feet to a guest room that he had been offered. Most the student interns were staying with their heroes or at their agency, he was no exception. And Shinso, Aizawa called before the boy got too far. It caused the tired teenager to look back with a sleepy expression. You did well today. Shinso's eyes widened a bit as he rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, nodding slowly. Thanks. While Shinso went to bed, falling asleep faster than he ever had before, a teacher worked restlessly at his desk in the teacher's lounge. Yamada found that he was beginning to nod off while grading papers, shaking his head a few times to keep himself going. He was about to reach for another paper out of a stack when he glanced at his phone screen. It had gotten so late and he would have to skip dinner if he wanted to make it back home in time. He didn't want to upset Aizawa any more than he had already by working so much. He leaned back in his chair with a loud sigh and a stretch. How exhausting this all was. Maybe I can treat myself to sleeping in tomorrow, he groaned to himself. The whole school was empty. But someone's gonna have to make them breakfast? No such thing as a day off. Yamada packed up the remaining papers, his documents, and his belongings into his bag. He put it over his shoulder and left the lounge, locking the door behind him. He would walk the abandoned halls and out the front entrance before taking a deep breath of the cool night air. Pulling out his phone, he checked the time. Making it home in a half hour was going to be tough, but he could totally make it. He would just have to hurry and not get distracted. The pro walked at a brisk pace, speed walking to try and beat the clock. With such low traffic, he didn't have to waste precious minutes waiting for cars to drive by as he could just cross at his leisure. Looking good. We're looking good. He was happy with himself for making some pretty impressive time. Humming to himself, he was just a bit more than halfway home when he stopped on the sidewalk. Stop. I don't want to disappear. I don't want to disappear, he heard a woman cry out down a thin side road. He felt a sudden chill, his body tensing, and his skin itching. Disappear. At night. Alone. With panicked eyes, he turned to look down the empty side road. Help me. Someone. This was a chance. It had to be. But even without that, someone was crying for help. Even without his hero costume, he was still a hero. He wouldn't let another person disappear. Not another one. No more. And thus Yamada quickly turned down the side road, following the cries that bounced off the walls. It crossed his mind that it could be a trap, but he was strong enough for this. His voice was loud enough to signal anyone in a wide radius and his phone was in his pocket. Stay away. He turned a corner into an alleyway. I'm coming, he called out, revealing his presence, but also posing as a warning to the cowardly villains that attacked people alone at night. He hoped they would become skittish and flee at the sound of a person that could be a witness. When he skidded to a halt, he saw a woman on her knees, crying into her hands as she was bleeding from a few wounds on her arms. It had looked like something had cut her repeatedly at her wrists all the way to her shoulder. Hey, you all right? He asked, quickly running up to her and putting his hands on the top of her shoulders where she wasn't cut. You're hurt, let's get you some help. Who attacked you? What did they look like? He had to know. He absolutely had to know. They took my little sister, the woman sobbed into her hands, muffling herself, but she was still able to be heard. Your sister? Just now? Yamada looked around frantically for a trace of anyone being back this way. Did you see where they went? Maybe they're still close. Then something clicked in his head. Why did this woman's voice sound familiar? Wait a second, he took another look at her. He couldn't see her face, and she was dressed in regular street clothes. Have I seen you before? It was only an instant when the woman's arm turned into a Venus flytrap, her skin turning green and her hand morphing into the plant, but to a much larger scale. They took my pollenina. Yamada didn't have a chance to react as he tried to take a step. But he wasn't quick enough. The woman's Venus flytrap arm opened its mouth as the bristles, that were sharper than normal bristles, sliced his throat. I'm sorry, she cried, jumping back to create distance between the two. Yamada tried to scream in pain but no sound left him as blood was leaking from his throat at a rapid pace. Keeping his hand over the wound, he struggled to speak. Earthly. Venus, his voice wheezed. She had been a pro-hero. Her little sister, the sidekick Pollenina, had disappeared over a month ago. She had been one of the driving leaders of the sudden disappearances case as soon as she went missing. He remembered seeing her crying when her sister's blood was identified in one of the explosions during the bloody tragedy. I just have to kill him, right? And you'll give her back? Venus shouted upward, looking around frantically. There was no sign of anyone around. Was the League of Villains watching? With the few seconds he had while she was yelling, Yamada took out his phone. I just have to kill you, I think. Please don't take it personally. He didn't have time to send a text. There was no time. She charged at him and he had to move quickly to dodge her arm. She kept wildly swinging at him as he desperately held his bleeding throat. How he wanted to tell her they were tricking her. Surely, she had to know that her sister was long dead. She had to give up. These villains, they were so cruel. Yamada tried to speak but the words wouldn't come out. It only made him bleed more. There was an attempt made to remove his cardigan and wrap it around the cut, but Venus's flytrap arm ate it while it was still in his hand. She took the moment of vulnerability to have her arm bite him, causing his body to become stunned as she spun around to build momentum and throw him against a brick wall. The force of the impact left a crack as he fell to the ground and the slits in his throat opened wider. Panicked, he watched more and more blood drench his hand, but also pour onto the dirt. He was going to die. He felt he was going to die here. He wasn't going to disappear like the others. He was a different kind of target. The threat. Back in a peaceful home, Aizawa stood in the kitchen drinking a cup of tea that he had made himself. He had been leaning back against the counter, checking the time on the stove every once in a while. It was past 11. He told himself that the moment he finished his tea, he would go out and retrieve his companion. Maybe he was just around the corner, making a run for it, realizing he was late. There was no way that he would actually be on campus grading papers for that long. But it was out of nowhere that he heard his phone go off at the counter. He went over to it to see what the notification was, expecting it to be a kind of excuse from Yamada explaining why he was late. Needless to say, he was baffled by seeing that it was just his location that was sent. He was close. But when Aizawa squinted, he saw that his companion had actually gone a little bit out of his way. A detour? There was no reason to take one on foot. There was no text. No explanation. But dial? Smartphones don't really do that anymore. Aizawa put his tea down to zoom in on the location that had been sent. Looking more closely, he saw that it was an alleyway. The realization caused his eyes to twitch open a bit wider. No, he muttered. There was no way he'd be in an alley. Not by himself. Not at night. He went to reach for his tea when he carelessly knocked over his cup. He watched the liquid spill onto the counter and then onto the floor, soaking one of his slippers, staining it. Something wasn't right. Yamada wouldn't do this. Hisashi wouldn't do this. The tea was not wiped up at all as Aizawa quickly slipped on his boots and his scarf. He would get it later. Even if this was a false alarm for panic, he couldn't be too safe. Before long, he was out the door, abandoning the tea to drip onto the floor, making the puddle on the tile grow a little bit more. He ran. He wanted to sleep. But he wanted to run even more. He wasn't going to sleep tonight without Yamada. He refused to. He followed the location sent to his phone without context, sprinting through crosswalks, turning corners carelessly, skidding to a stop when he found the right side street. He went further in, deeper into a maze of alleyways until he froze at one that led to a dead end. He froze. "Hi, Zashi." A near-shattered phone was at his feet, broken glasses lay just a few feet away. "So, I'll make it peaceful for you. I know you tried so hard, Present Mike. But you're really helping me now. So thank you so very much." Aizawa witnessed Earthly Venus holding Yamada in the leaf jaws of her giant Venus flytrap arm, his head, arm, and feet sticking out through the bristles. His eyes had become dull and half-lidded as blood poured from his mouth, down to his neck where he was already bleeding from 3 massive slits, and turning his red shirt a darker red. He looked dead. He had to be. But Aizawa saw his body twitch in the plant. It was trying to digest him with some kind of chemical, paralyzing him, but Yamada refused to die. "Drop him." Aizawa raised his voice to a loud snarl. His eyes glowed red as his hair stood up. "Drop him now." The Venus flytrap retracted back, shrinking and dropping Yamada to the dirt limply. You can't get me out of here." Venus frantically whipped her arm forward repeatedly, trying so desperately to summon her plant quirk again. But Aizawa was keeping her from doing it. His scarf was starting to rise up when she turned tail to make a run for it. She climbed a dumpster and jumped to a fire escape, clumsily climbing it up to flee. Aizawa tried to get his scarf to nab her, but she was getting too far up. It couldn't reach. He could have chased her down. He should have chased her down. She could be the key to stopping all the disappearances, and yet, he ran to Yamada's aid. There was an app on his phone that would send first responders to his location. Never had he logged in his hero identification so quickly. There was not a second to waste. They didn't have time. Zashi, look at me. He slid to his knees, taking Yamada in his arms, keeping the neck wound off and away from the dirt. He was loudly wheezing, his body limp with parts of his clothes being burned in patches, the skin revealed showing bruises and light burns. But his throat was so severely slit. Aizawa tried to cover it to control the bleeding, getting blood all over himself in the process. Yamada was just bleeding everywhere. So much blood. Such a terrible mess. Aizawa tried to keep the blonde's head tilted to the side for the blood to spill out of his mouth rather than have him choke on it. You'll be okay? You hear me? I know you can. He wasn't blinking, he wasn't moving anywhere except his chest, painfully struggling to rise. He didn't make it home in time. He was late to join him in bed for the night. Hisashi, for once in your life you need to shut up. Such a noisy man. Such an over-energetic hero. A cringe-worthy hyped-up teacher. An obnoxious radio show host. He could never stop talking. I was the one that was late. You need to shut your goddamn mouth. He shouldn't be yelling at him. Not now. He shut his eyes tightly as he leaned down to kiss his forehead in an apology. Please shut up, Zashi. I can't let you die. He held him so tightly, putting their foreheads together. Shirakumo's gonna be pissed. You're supposed to stay with me longer than this. He could feel his arms become so warm as they had become so soaked in blood. We're supposed to be heroes together, Zashi. What about his students? All those bright minds and faces that filled him with passion. He had done the same for them. What would they do without him? What about Shinso? I'm not letting you die, just focus on me. Keep listening to me like you always do. He always listened. Never had he ignored him for a second. So considerate. Such a big and beautiful heart. Zashi, please don't go. While a hero was broken in sadness, a villain was shattered with rage. You did what? I thought you wanted Venus was cut off by her own screams. Midoriya and Venus were down in the basement laboratory with the little villain dressed in a black hoodie and pants with just his upper mask on, letting his voice be clear as he yelled. He wore his wired gloves as he held her in the air with the wire wrapped painfully tight at her upper arms. I didn't say kill him. He spread his arms wide to force the wire to travel down her arms. The wire was wrapped so tightly, and the material was too powerful for her skin. The force and speed of Midoriya's pull ripped her already cut skin nearly clean off. Her upper arms to her wrists had been completely skinned, causing the woman to shriek as slabs of skin dangled from her wrists. I wanted you to just attack him, you fucking idiot. Tears brimmed in his eyes. Attacking his teacher was supposed to shake the trail from Todoroki. If Todoroki was the main suspect, it would make no sense for him to hurt his only ally on the investigation team. Todoroki would never allow that, not when he risked his life for a teacher already. But it wasn't supposed to go this far. I killed your sister a long time ago. Go say hi to her, why don't you? Midoriya was beyond angry. Shigaraki had only been gone a few days and his little brother had royally messed up. This was so severely bad. Embarrassing and shameful. But so painful to his heart. I am so sorry, Mr. Yamada. He slammed the wires down to the floor, forcing her to be bashed into the tile. Her cries of pain and regretful agony were only silent to him as they would deafen anyone. He quickly went over to the furnace and kicked the door open to it. He didn't deserve that. But if you want to see your sister so bad, go look for her. With his gloves he raised her up again, taking one hand's worth of wires off one of her wrists while he used the other to fling her inside like a tattered doll. Just as she was tossed in, the blood from her arms had splattered a thin trail onto him. He didn't react to the shrieks of someone being burned alive in the furnace. He slammed the door shut. The pain she felt couldn't possibly compare to his own or Yamada's. She deserved every bit of it. She deserved more. What kind of hero was so prepared to kill another? The little villain fell to his knees on the floor, holding his shoulders as he trembled. He felt so sick. So ashamed. This was a disaster. How could he ever go back to school at this rate? This was all his fault. I swear. It was an Axi dash. He felt his phone ring. His hand was quivering violently, reaching for his phone but then dropping it. He took hold of it with both hands. No caller ID, but he knew the number was the hospital from his internship. Why dashed he heard his own voice on the other side. The clones. You need to get back here now. I don't know what happened, but Mr. Yamada just got here and he's hurt real bad. But he's breathing. They're gonna want the real you for this dash. Midoriya hung up instantly and threw his mask across the room. Never had he jumped into the elevator so fast, rapidly pressing the first floor button. The ride had never felt so agonizingly long. The doors didn't even open all the way when he slipped through them the moment they were wide enough. Dad, I need to go back right now, his voice cried with panic. Teary-eyed and spotted with blood, the little killer was stunned to see Kurogiri at the bar, but also Shigaraki standing before him, frozen in the motion of putting his messenger bag down. His face expressed nothing but anxious confusion. What the hell did you do? IT tried to. Midoriya couldn't admit the mistake he just made so clearly to Shigaraki. He tried making a massive move against the heroes without his permission. He completely overstepped his boundaries. Present Mike was not just a pro hero, but a teacher at Urare, his teacher. Not only had he endangered the pro's life, but he deeply jeopardized his position as a spy inside the school. It had only been a few days since they met at the cafe. That would be terribly suspicious. What was he thinking? Why did he make such an impulsive and unthoughtful move? Why couldn't he have just waited for Shigaraki to come back? Tell me later. I don't know what's up, but if you gotta be somewhere, get going quick. Shigaraki only shrugged and waved him off, putting his bag on the counter. We'll talk when you get back. I gotta make a call anyway. He didn't seem all that worried at all. Was it because he was so oblivious to the situation, or did he simply trust his little doctor to fix what had been done? Midoriya only held his breath and held back his tears as he turned to Kurogiri. He had to get going. Midoriya was warped right back to the hospital where he found the clone hiding in a supply closet that was in the small break room. As soon as he approached it, he was met with Getting Scrub's clothes thrown at his face. Get changed right now. Mix going into the emergency room as we speak, it said in a demanding whisper. Midoriya nodded guiltily as he took off his bloodied clothes. He hid them in the closet with the clone. He would be returning to the bar when this was over anyhow. What the hell happened? Earthly Venus probably thought I'd be happier if Mike was dead when I just wanted him to get threatened. I should have never trusted a hero like that. He should have just done it himself. Or he should have asked Shigaraki for the best course of action. Things didn't have to turn out this way. Tamura's going to be pissed for sure, he said before shaking his head rapidly. He couldn't think about that yet. One thing at a time. He put a mask on and gloves before making a run for the emergency room. It was so late at night that there wasn't a lot of staff to spare. They would just have to work with the people they had. When Midoriya came to the open door, he could see multiple machines being pulled up and started up with IVs and blood transfusions being prepared quickly, but all orderly. Nurses and a single doctor were all moving swiftly, communicating loudly with their nerves taking over their volume but not their actions. They weren't shaking or fumbling or tripping over each other. For a little villain doctor who had worked alone for months, he suddenly felt out of place. Not only that he could tend to wounds here and there, but to save a life, he had never done such a thing. His tools had only been used to learn, torture, and kill. His skills were only meant to take lives, not save them. What these hell are these burns? It's like acid but dash. A nurse touched one of the burns on Yamada's leg. He had fallen completely unconscious and there was blood all over the floor from moving him in the room. The gashes in his neck had opened far more than they had at the initial swipe at him, but small patches of burns littered his skin, revealing the tissue underneath and even bleeding at points. It looked like the skin around the burns were still sizzling and even melting away to deepen the wounds. What was he attacked by? Another nurse asked. Eraserhead said it was Earthly Venus, the flytrap hero. But I don't think that plant is normal, another answered, finishing setting up an air pump for Yamada to breathe. What the hell is that supposed to mean? A different one asked. Midoriya approached the bed, getting a quick glimpse at his teacher, teetering on the border of living and dying. The heart rate monitor was providing a weak signal. The little villain hurried to a table on wheels, frantically searching for something. It means that plant didn't have a normal chemical makeup as a regular one. It would use a jasmonic acid and enzymes to break down bugs to a liquid while sucking the life out of it. But that acid is used for anti-aging on human skin. The nurses turned to Midoriya, impressively shocked by his stockpiled knowledge. So what was it? The doctor asked, making quick work of the neck wound that was the biggest concern at the moment. He was keeping a steady hand with an assistant to repair anything that had been torn on the inside and out with a healing quirk. Though it appeared they were having a difficult time repairing something past the slabs of dangling skin. I don't know. Midoriya never looked further into Venus's quirk. He killed her without thinking. But it's probably gastric acid because that's what a human body would use to break food down. This means baking soda should keep it from getting worse. He found a yellow box at the bottommost shelf of the table and quickly handed it to a nurse to have the others to keep the burns from worsening. But if any of that acid got into Yamada's neck? Is there anything I can do, doctor? There had to be something he could do to salvage this. Fuck. The doctor pulled back. There's something in there. I can't get it. Midoriya came up beside him, getting so close to his teacher's face. He had seen so much blood on his subjects before, but this was something far different from all of them. He bit his lip under his mask looking at him. And maybe I could. Let me see, he offered. I think it's glass, but it's so damn tiny. If we're not careful, that's it. The doctor held tweezers in his hand that were soaked in blood from a previous attempt. You've got small, young hands and eyes, don't you? Are you sure you want this responsibility? Midoriya wasn't the only one who would be able to do it, but he'd have the highest chance of succeeding. The doctor cleaned and sanitized the tweezers fastly before looking to the little villain to make a choice. Aizawa sat in the waiting room at the entrance, his leg bouncing and holding his forehead with his elbow on his steady leg. His black clothes were darkly stained with blood, his hands were dirted with it, and there were dried spots on his cheek. He hadn't bothered to wash it off yet. His phone was face down on the seat next to him with a bloody handprint on it. The room was empty except for him and a few staff members, all of them residing in silence. The only notable sound for nearly an hour was just a janitor mopping the floor. Mr. Aizawa Shinsu's voice was the first thing to break the near silence. He was in lounge pants still, but he had thrown on a hoodie and didn't bother tying his shoes. He came in a rush. He was out of breath. I got your text. Where's Mr. Yamada? Is he all right? A look of fear spread across Shinsu's face when Aizawa raised his head to see him. He could see all the blood. Is that It's not mine, Aizawa cut him off, appearing more tired than he ever had before. He's in bad shape. I don't know what's going to happen. Shinso felt his breath and his heart get stuck in his throat. He had just seen Yamada that afternoon. They had lunch together, the three of them did. He was going to be home at 11 because that's what he promised. He was fine. He was just here. But more than anything, he was always there. Always there when someone needed him. Whether it was a boy sitting alone in a field after everyone had left, or a man stricken with grief. You know he'll be okay, don't you? You know him better than anyone. Shinso had his hands out in front of him, subtly moving them as he spoke. He doesn't leave people like this. And you know damn well he would never leave you covered in blood. Shinso-Aizawa could tell he was getting heated. But he knew from experience that you can't get your hopes up after an accident like this. People die. Whether you're ready for it or not, people die. He was around Shinsu's age when he learned this. You can't be giving up on him already. He's strong. Something Shinso said caused Aizawa to turn away and bite his lip. The day Kosuke's body was found, the day he was grieving on the couch, Yamada had told him he was going to work for Endeavor. He tried to change his mind. But he remembered he had the dumbest smile on his face. I'll be fine. I'm like really freaking strong, don't you know? I'm present, Mike. Shinso-Aizawa tried to interrupt him again. But the boy that was usually so quiet wasn't done yet. Whatever happened, you know he'll pull through. You would know how stubborn he is. Always so loud and obnoxious, irritating at times. But he was stubbornly affectionate and caring, unwilling to let people struggle alone. There's still so much he has to tell you. He wouldn't die without telling you how long he's waited for you to finally want to get into a relationship with him. Aizawa gritted his teeth and lowered his head. Something struck him hard in the chest, and yet there was no wound. Mr. Aizawa? Aizawa and Shinso both moved their focus to the little freckled boy that had walked up to the both of them, flu mask under his chin and blood on his scrubs. And Shinso? Midoriya seemed a bit confused to see his classmate as well. But he remembered that he stayed with Yamada and Aizawa every once in a while. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to assume he was interning there. Both the tried teacher and the tired student looked so stressed and anxious to see the little villain standing before them. Even if it was just for a moment, Aizawa had forgotten all about his suspicions revolving around Midoriya in place of his worry for Yamada. Is he? Shinso was the only one of the two to have the courage to ask. But he couldn't bear to get all the words out. Though, they both leaned back a bit when they saw Midoriya smile heartfully. He's going to be fine, he said softly, yet so happily, raising his head high with a closed-eye grin. The relief that washed over Shinso and Aizawa was overwhelming as Shinso even had to sit down and take a long breath. The other was left frozen, staring at the freckled boy in shock. His burns were pretty bad, but one of the nurse's quirks was able to keep any of them from scarring. There was a bit of heavy bruising on his back and abdomen, so he'll be in a little pain when he goes to sit down. What about his neck? Aizawa asked. Shinso glanced at him, afraid as to why he asked about Yamada's neck specifically. Midoriya tilted his head with an awkward smile. That's gonna scar. And his voice is gonna be sore for at least a few days. I wouldn't recommend he use his quirk at all for 2 weeks. He tilted his head up and gestured to his own neck. His trachea was almost severed when the blades of Venu's flytrap got him. She went through 2 rings of hyaline cartilage and managed to lodge a tiny piece of glass between them. Had it been any bigger, it could have ripped the trachea from the inside. We're lucky she missed the thyroid gland and got the sternothyroid and sternohyoid instead too. Someone's quirk was able to heal those real quick? Shinso appeared slightly confused by the terms Midoriya was using. Medical corps students didn't mess around. Midoriya noticed his confusion and shortened his explanation a bit. She almost cut through his windpipe and got glass in the gash. Had she gotten any closer, he would have died almost instantly. But the glass would have done it if we didn't get to him quick enough. It was from his phone, Aizawa mumbled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Yamada's phone where the screen had been shattered to pieces. He tried to get help. He was only able to send his location. He placed it down on his knee. Had they not gotten to him time? Had he just been a little slower, surely Yamada would have died. Can we see him? Midoriya walked alongside Shinso with Aizawa following behind them through the halls of the hospital. Aizawa couldn't help but glance at the rooms they were passing. The 3 of them had been mostly quiet on their walk through the maze of halls. You're a real hero doing this kind of stuff. It sounds a lot harder than what I'm doing, Shinso said, breaking the silence. His words made Midoriya flinch. A part of him wanted to blush at the statement, but the majority of himself felt enraged. I wouldn't say that. I guess I'm just passionate about this kind of stuff. Midoriya shrugged with a smile, trying to be modest. It just takes a lot of studying and a lot of bodies, a lot of practice. The 2 students smiled at each other. But Aizawa's eyes narrowed at the slightest red glint in the little killer's eyes. It was my first time really working with machines, too. I've never seen them used up close, so interning here has been useful. The 3 had reached the door to a hospital room and Midoriya put his hand on the doorknob. If he's awake, he's gonna be a bit out of it. And try not to have him talk. Opening the door, there was the low, quiet sound of a few machines running, their fans rumbling subtly. Aizawa and Shinso entered together as Midoriya held the door open for them. He watched their faces express painful sympathy and sheer sadness. A man that had always been bouncing with energy, smiling, encouraging, loving, hyper, passionate, yet determined more than anything, he appeared to be clinging to consciousness. Lime-colored eyes that were usually so bright were so dull, half-lidded in exhaustion. His hair down and messy from the fight and being moved around so much. A tracheostomy tube was connected to his neck, letting air pass through to his lungs cleanly with more tubes in his nose. IVs and bloodletters were connected to his arms, one hand resting limply on his chest and the other by his side. Bandages were scattered to tend to the acid burns. A monitor was at his bedside, recording all his vitals which had become more stable over the hours. "Oh, Zashi," Aizawa breathed quietly, frozen in his place at the sight of his partner in such a sorry state. Shinso unhesitantly approached Yamada's bedside, looking down at him worriedly. He couldn't imagine how much pain he was in, or maybe he was too numb to feel anything at all. Looking down at him, he noticed that weak, dulled eyes that had been staring at the ceiling subtly shifted to look at him. It made the boy flinch. Yamada was still aware, but it appeared that he couldn't move all that well. Though it wouldn't stop the stubborn man from trying as he turned his head only a small bit with a weak smile. He then slowly reached up to place his hand, with a pulse oximeter on it, on Shinso's head. Aizawa followed behind Shinso after a few moments, standing beside him and looking down at him so sadly, though it was hard to see his face behind such shaggy messy hair. Yamada shifted his gaze to him, smiling sympathetically as he took his hand away from Shinso's head to try and raise it a little higher. He didn't have the strength to do it, however. Before it fell, Aizawa took hold of it, bending down to get to a more even level. He stayed there in silence. He didn't know what to say. He just wanted to hold his hand, placing his thumb over the other's wrist to feel his pulse, to feel that he was still alive and there. Yamada's voice sounded dreadful, even worse than before with the tube going through his throat. Aizawa was sure to cut him off to keep him from talking. "Don't say anything," he said sharply before softening his tone. "I don't want to hear you apologize. You shouldn't be talking at all." So, he lowered his head a little bit more. They hated seeing each other like this. "As much as I want to listen to you, you need to stay quiet." He wanted to listen to everything he had to say for hours. He missed his podcast. He missed eating dinner with him without paperwork distracting him. He missed looking up and seeing light green eyes being on him all the time, the only attention he ever wanted. He had been so selfish to want all those things, too afraid to make anything out of it all. It was never fair for Yamada. "How long until he can be discharged?" Shinso asked, watching Yamada stare so tiredly at Aizawa. Aizawa had begun to shake very subtly with his face still obscured by his hair. But Yamada could see him, and whatever expression he saw, it made a tear escape the corner of his eye. His weak smile persisted. Midoriya had been checking the functionality of the machines at work and going over some paperwork that had been left behind, checking the status of his teacher in silence. He looked up from a few papers and looked back. His gaze shifted to the ceiling in thought. "You'd have to talk to one of the doctors. But my guess is the next day or so with the quirks they have on standby here," he answered. Both boys glanced at the teachers, both seeming to have the world on their minds. Midoriya and Shinso then looked at each other before Midoriya gestured his head to the door. "I'm going to get a snack from the vending machine near the front. You want to come with me, Shinso?" "Yeah. I could use one too." They both lied and exited the room together. They shut the door and only walked halfway down the hall before sharing another glance. At the corner, they turned right around and put their ears against the door to eavesdrop. They couldn't hear anything through it, so Midoriya just cracked the door open an inch so they could listen and peek in as well. Aizawa seemed to be at a loss for words, as he had been the entire evening. I shouldn't have," he wanted to apologize, but he knew none of this was his fault. He didn't want to upset Yamada by placing blame or guilt on himself. But how could he express to him how bad he felt? How scared he was? How lonely he would have been? "I'm glad you came." Yamada's voice was terribly hoarse and barely above a whisper. He knew very well that he shouldn't be talking, but he was too stubborn and too talkative to stay quiet for too long. It tore Aizawa up inside that Yamada always knew the best things to say, while he could never find the words for these things. When it came to the students, he knew what to tell them almost all the time. But when it came to himself, there was a painful struggle. Yamada was forced to talk to ease his pain because he couldn't do it himself. "Really thought you were going to die. I really thought you were going to die in my arms in some trashed alley. I was scared." Aizawa held Yamada's hand to his forehead, keeping his head down. He couldn't look at him. He didn't want to see him smiling through the pain, through the exhaustion. You've been working past your limits lately? I should have convinced you to come with me and Shinso. I should have been harder on you, but I've already been so cruel to you. He smirked, but it was forced. I've been such an ass to you for years. Yamada immediately frowned and pulled his hand back weakly before shoving his palm over the other's mouth. He didn't want to hear him talk like that. Never had Aizawa come off as cruel. Never had he felt like he was an ass. He never wanted him to talk like that about himself. He never wanted him to feel that pressure. He also never wanted him to force a smirk on his face when he knew he wanted to cry. Aizawa pulled Yamada's hand away from his mouth to hold it with both of his hands again. No, I've been so selfish. You and I both know the house is yours. I'm not a good cook and he bit his tongue. It hurt to even think about it. Bro. I know, Yamada smiled so weakly once again. He appeared saddened and grief-stricken, but his smile wasn't forced. It was one of understanding. He never got over him. He closed his eyes and tilted his head subtly. The rate of his heart was changing at the sound coming from the monitor. I understand. But he took his hand back quickly and held the tube and bandages around his neck as he took a painful wheeze for breath. Midoriya warned them both that he shouldn't be talking. Shinso almost raced through the door when Midoriya grabbed his arm to keep him still. The tubes in Yamada's neck and nose weren't going to fail him. Aizawa stood up straighter in a reaction of panic, holding on to the bed frame. Yamada kept one hand on his neck and used his other to hold Aizawa's wrists weakly, a subtle way of telling him he was okay as he closed his eyes and steadied his breathing with calmed breaths. Hisashi, you really he needed to stop talking. He really needed to spare his throat the pain. But Yamada just gritted his teeth. I know, you never finished grieving. There were still things he needed to say. Things Aizawa had to hear. You were never good at taking care of yourself. Through small tears and the pain in his neck, his smile was so loving. But being with you every day, it made me so happy. It didn't matter what we were. He cared so much. I just wanted to help you, maybe save you. Because I love you. His chest heaved rapidly, trying to catch his breath as he wheezed. But he looked satisfied, having said everything he wanted to. Though his smile disappeared after a few moments when blood began to seep through the bandages around his neck. A wound was likely reopening from how hard he was forcing himself to speak. It took him a minute to control himself, his heart rate slowly returning to a calm state. Aizawa leaned over him, holding his hand tightly as he was helpless to do anything but watch Yamada suffer. Yamada suddenly seemed so tired, his grip becoming completely limp. Aizawa caressed the other's cheek carefully, cautious not to cause him any more pain. He could tell Yamada was losing consciousness and slipping away slowly now. The talking put him at his limit. He could never take it easy on himself, even in a state like this. When you come home Aizawa began but paused. He was ready for this. He's wanted this. He always has. He had been the only one holding himself back. Let's be something. He hated how it took a moment like this, for Yamada to be sitting at death's door, for him to have the courage to move forward. It was so terribly selfish. Yet, he leaned over to carefully kiss his lips despite not feeling the gesture be returned. He knew it would have been if Yamada had stayed awake long enough. After a decent amount of time had passed since Yamada fell asleep, Shinso and Midoriya walked back into the room like they hadn't been listening the whole time. Midoriya had gone over to a counter where he had looked over paperwork previously. Then he proceeded to go over small routines Aizawa and Yamada would need to do in order to have a safe, quick, and proper recovery while at home. Another doctor would go over all the requirements and suggestions again with Yamada when he woke up. As for that night, Aizawa and Shinso were left to go home together without him. However, before Aizawa walked out the door, he looked back to Midoriya. Thank you, he would mutter before placing a hand on Shinso's shoulder for a moment to guide him away. Midoriya could sense gratitude from the teacher's words, but he could still hear distrust. So you almost killed your teacher without consulting me or Kurojiiri? Shigaraki asked, sitting at the bar and eating a sandwich in an awkward grip. It was past midnight and this was when he decided to eat like the gremlin he was. I know I'm not about breathing down your neck and making you ask for permission for everything you do, But attacking a teacher sounds like something I should know about. Especially when you bring a hero here to do it for you. I know. I don't know what I was thinking, Midoriya said quietly, ashamed of his actions. He sat right beside Shigaraki, his fingers digging into the wood of the counter. I guess I got a little worked up when I heard Shochan was a prime suspect. I didn't want him to be kept away from me just when we could see each other again. And he bit his lower lip. Not trying to say you don't need me anymore, right? Shigaraki tried to finish Midoriya's thought. The little villain then looked at him in a panic. Oh, of course not. I'm kidding, Shigaraki said casually, unapologetic about nearly giving his little brother a heart attack. That was as far as any punishment was going to go. Tried to impress me by showing that you could do things on your own? He asked with a subtle smirk. He could see Midoriya nod from the corner of his eye. Trying to impress him almost seemed to completely backfire. How humiliating. You fixed your mistake by saving him. And you probably lowered the suspicion around your Prince Charming by attacking his only ally in the investigation while also making yourself look good for the heroes. He patted the little killer's head. So nothing to worry about, don't you think? Midoriya nodded again, looking down at the counter. He was relieved that Shigaraki wasn't mad. So, did you find his older brother? Midoriya asked quietly. He was curious, but he didn't want to look like he was trying to change the subject. He jumped at the sound of Shigaraki's fist slamming down against the counter. He's such a jackass. Guess he did end up finding him. Though, it didn't seem like it went well. He wants almost nothing to do with his little brother and seems perfectly content with just drinking himself away in filthy backstreets. Running away from home and trauma could cause such behavior. He wants nothing to do with his family. He doesn't even go by his real name, he wants to be called Dabi. Was it even a good idea for Dabi to meet Todoroki? I wouldn't be so hard on him. He's been missing for quite some time, out there on the streets alone. I trust you were polite? Kurogyari said, coming out of a back room with a small bowl of noodles for Midoriya, whose face lit up at the sight of food. Dark Fog Dad's home-cooked meals were always something to look forward to after work. It was hard when he tried to kill me on sight. I didn't even say anything to him. Shigaraki took out his phone and glared at his text history where Dabi's message was stored. I treated the alcoholic to drinks and he got drunk by the time he left. He kept saying he hated my eyes. Midoriya couldn't tell if he was annoyed or petty at the insult to his eyes. Maybe he just doesn't like the color red, the little villain commented. Todoroki didn't like his scar, hot drinks, or his fire half at all. It wouldn't be too odd for Dabi to dislike the color red. Maybe, Shigaraki grumbled. He put his cheek in his hand and began tapping his fingers on the counter. He appeared to be thinking about something, his phone down in front of him. Why did he bother texting him? When they fought, why did the little brother reference make him loosen the grip on his throat? Why didn't he want to listen to the full recording? Why did he really go to the sports festival? Why did he want Todoroki to believe he was dead? Shigaraki eventually found himself peering at Midoriya from the corner of his eye again, watching him eat before he put his arms on the counter to rest his head on them. He must have been tired. Are the new Nomas here yet? Shigaraki asked Kurogyari. They just arrived this morning, Kurogyari answered. It made Midoriya, with both eyes closed, suddenly open one at the sound of Nomas. Stain also left a message that he is prepared for an attack on Hosu at Izuku's convenience. Shigaraki stood up from his seat and stretched. I'll send for twice in 2 days then. He cracked his neck by tilting it side to side. And let me get a look at these guys. He was about to approach the elevator when Midoriya got up suddenly and followed after him. I want to see them too. The little villain stood beside his older brother at the entrance to the elevator. Shigaraki smirked before ruffling the green fluffy mess next to him, causing Midoriya to grumble in annoyance. Though a part of him found it more endearing than annoying. Both of you, Kurogyari called to them just as the elevator door opened. Both of them turned back, curious what the suited villain had to say. They saw him gaze at the glass in his foggy hands, yellow fog eyes narrowed as he stared at his reflection. I don't think the three of them are like the first one. Something seems different. Please be cautious. Shigaraki waved him off in acknowledgement but didn't really take him seriously. The two boys went into the elevator to be brought down to the Noma holding room. We've talked about this before, but Kurogiri doesn't trust the doctor that makes these things. He's always a bit paranoid. Shigaraki explained, leaning back against the wall of the elevator. I was never really sure why. It sounded like he had asked Kurogiri about it before. He must not have received an answer. Midoriya would have to remind himself to ask about their relationship some other time. In going down to the Noma holding room, Midoriya and Shigaraki would find 3 Nomas chained up in place where the giant one had been so long ago. One was pitch black in color with intense muscle and metal protectors on its legs. Another was bluish-gray with long limbs and 2 pairs of eyes on the brain poking out of its skull. And the last one was a tannish yellow color with metal over its mouth, having clawed and muscular hands, as well as bird-like feet with very sharp talon toes. They were all sitting still in silence. Though Midoriya noticed the tan-winged one twitch and made eye contact with him. These 3 were not like the first one as they were smaller with more varying quirks and body types. The first one had always been so still until commanded to move or react. Yet the tan one was staring at the little villain. They should be under our control again. I want them to cause as much destruction and get us as much attention as possible to lure more people to the league. I'm counting on you and Akaguro to also leave a mark. I know you two won't disappoint, Shigaraki explained, getting on one knee to lift the wrist of the blue Nomu. He appeared to just be examining it. You say you want a team, just like your master suggested. How big are we talking here? Midoriya asked, approaching the black Nomu. It was the one that most closely resembled the first Nomu. Will they live with us? He knew there were more rooms to spare on the second floor. He imagined one had been prepared for Dabi already, just in case. But how many people would be here? Would he not be as relevant anymore? Just a few. Not as many that I used as pawns at the USJ. But enough. And I'm not sure if I want to deal with living with more than a few people. Shigaraki answered, giving the face of the blue Nomu a few pats to the side of the face to see if it would react. It didn't. That seemed fairly normal to him. I won't be tolerating dead weight or people who don't listen. I'm not wasting my time. He was going to go about recruiting pretty seriously. But he also wasn't going to drive himself crazy catering to everyone who would need a place to stay at the bar. Midoriya nodded in understanding before taking out his phone. He went to the Photos app and began scrolling through some pictures. Shochan and I have been texting. Endeavor's been taking him to Hosu for patrol, looking for Master Akaguro and me. Ingenium's younger brother has been interning there as well, and I bet he's looking for us too. He and Shochan are close, closer than he was comfortable with. He held up his phone to the tan Nomu, showing it a picture Midoriya had taken of Todoroki when he was dissociating and spacing out while looking at the sky at school. No matter what, don't hurt Todoroki Shudo. It would be his first command to all the Nomas. He wasn't going to allow a repeat of what happened last time. He was fully aware of the possibility of running into his hero, or for a Nomu to find him first. He wasn't going to let him get that severely hurt because of a mistake like that ever again. Shigaraki watched him give the 3 Nomas the command, making sure they were focusing on the picture. However, the black Nomu did not have eyes to see. He would let it smell the sheets in Todoroki's private room later. If your Prince Charming is going to be in the district, is it safe for you to go with Akaguro? Shigaraki asked, poking at the wings of the tan Nomu. If things get bad, it could be the 2 of you against him and other heroes. What would you do? The chances of them crossing paths in the attack were not slim. Especially with Ida and Endeavor on a hunt for the villainous duo. I'm not sure. I've thought about it, but Stain wouldn't run away from a fight. There'd be no backing down. I wouldn't be able to fight him. I couldn't bear to hurt him, not again. Midoriya appeared somber at the thought. He would usually be so ecstatic for another attack against the heroes. But the risk involved with this one had made him anxious. The wire in my gloves is fireproof. And if they froze, they wouldn't break. The only thing I could do is restrain him. But I'd imagine he'd be very upset with me if we killed anyone important to him. If Ida was there, there would be a lot of trouble. Ida always made things so frustrating, so complicated. He got in the way so many times. It was such a cool, clear night. The flame hero was walking the streets with a small squad traveling separately, yet close by. He kept his head high and walked at a steady pace, occasionally glancing up at the building rooftops to see members of his team jumping roof to roof, all of them with earpieces and reporting sightings to each other. East side high ground, all clear. No scent on the ground. Endeavor listened to every report. No suspicious persons on Main. But don't let your guard down. Not many people were out this late at night. And with the recent attack on Ingenium, no one wanted to be out. With word of the League of Villains and Serial Killer Stain working together, being alone at night was incredibly dangerous. And yet the one following Endeavor did not seem all that focused on his surroundings, rather his phone was more important. Scrolling through the news, there wasn't a single report on Present Nick's attack. It was being covered up. Shudo, how many times do I have to tell you to put that damn phone away? You should have left it at home. Endeavor growled. Todoroki glanced up from his phone with only his eyes but did not put it away. Ingenium's attack was downtown. Why don't we look there? Todoroki asked, checking reports. You may think they wouldn't attack the same place twice. But that's exactly why they would. That's how it works with robberies. Because robberies and murders don't work the same. Now take your eyes off of that thing and pay attention. Endeavor huffed. Todoroki rolled his eyes and begrudgingly put his phone back in his pocket. He did not look thrilled to be out, let alone so late at night. Yet he kept quiet and occasionally looked down alleyways that were just empty except for the occasional rat. Oh, Endeavor! Fancy seeing you out? His attention was pried away at the sound of an unfamiliar, enthusiastic voice. He couldn't recognize the hero, but he looked so normal compared to most. Normal hero, Manual. Many heroes stationed in Hosu must have been patrolling nightly since the attack on Ingenium. The two pros' paths just happened to meet at a corner. Though it wasn't the hero that stole most of Todoroki's attention, it was Ida that was standing right beside the man. They only made eye contact for a moment before Ida looked away. He appeared frustrated, tense. He could tell even though he had a helmet on. On a water tower, a little killer with masks resting on his head and under his chin was eating a few candies. He sat on the edge with his feet dangling off, examining the cityscape. It was all so quiet now, not even a lot of colorful city lights to be seen. Streets were becoming more and more barren at night. Beside him, Stain was kneeling, checking the city terrain as well. He could see a bright hero jumping from rooftop to rooftop, using fire to give herself more airtime. It didn't seem like she could see them. They're looking for us? Stain commented. Midoriya nodded before holding a candy out to him. That's one of Endeavor's sidekicks, Burnin. If she's here, then Endeavor is too. Which means Shudo's here. Midoriya deducted, seeming disappointed. He was at least hoping for a slim chance that Todoroki wouldn't be here. But that was hoping for too much. He watched Stain take the offered candy and eat it shamelessly. We may run into him, you know that. We may have to rough him up a bit because we can't let him get in our way. I'll try to be careful if it comes to that, but I can promise nothing. It was a hard truth. Stain couldn't just go easy on people. You said he was a perfect example of a hero. That'll give me reason enough to spare him. He needs to keep a distance? Midoriya nodded again, still appearing anxious. Something didn't feel right about tonight. But then he felt a hand on his shoulder. No matter what happens, we'll leave a mark for everyone to understand. We'll reform this city and kill all the fake heroes. They were only after the fakes. Todoroki would certainly be spared. Then there was the sound of footsteps on the other side of Midoriya. Both killers glanced over to see Shigaraki having been warped to the same water tower by Kurojiri. With a hand on his face, he stood beside them with his arms folded looking out over the quiet city. It wouldn't be quiet for very much longer. Hosu City looks nicer than I expected, he commented. Hearing a bit of shuffling from behind, the three of them looked back to see Kurojiri bringing the three nomas. Through portals. Kurojiri then joined them on the water tower, hands behind his back as he waited patiently. You really never go out, huh? Midoriya slided out of a brotherly tease. He appeared to loosen up at the arrival of his big brother. But it was only a little. Irrelevant. Shigaraki huffed, then hunched over slightly to point to the city. It's not going to look nice for long. Nomas, go wild. There was a choir of loud shrieked roars from the three nomas. It only took that one command for them to leap off the water tower and make their attack with an explosion of a small building. An explosion bright enough to light up the whole city, loud enough for all the heroes to hear, big enough to start a raging fire. The tan Nomo flew out, picking up cars and launching them at buildings, bullet trains, and tossing them into fires to cause more destructive explosions, with the two on the ground proceeding to wreak havoc. It didn't take long for the screams of common folk to replace the silence of the disturbed city. Midoriya watched in awe, finding the flames to be so beautiful and the distress of the people to be so fascinating. It was all so alluring, the destruction and the fear. Stain looked at him, focusing on the hypnotized expression on the little villain's face. All the people and heroes that believe weak quirks and quirkless people were useless, to see them like that. He watched as people were fleeing for their lives, as they were crying and shouting. At the start of his villainous journey, he would have felt such pity and guilt for them. But it had become a sick pleasure. "You'd think they deserve it," he mumbled. "They've become brainwashed by capitalized heroes. They feed into their false idols' greed. Sacrifices must be made for reformation, and we'll make sure those sacrifices are not worthless." Stain began to stand up with Midoriya. The little killer pushed up his mouth mask and was about to pull down his face mask when he stopped for a moment to get one last clear look at the chaotic burning city. The lives lost here would not be put to waste. They would support them in taking down heroes that have become too powerful and too influential. They let Endeavor and All Might become too powerful. Take them away, they take their idols and the faith the public had with them. "Mr. Akaguro, could you spare just a moment?" Kurogiri tapped Stain's shoulder, gaining his attention. Shigaraki and Midoriya both looked at them but did not think much of it. Probably just Kurogiri being a dad and asking him to protect Midoriya. This gave the two others a minute to enjoy the view. Shigaraki was ecstatic. "This is good. Let's make this flashy. It's so cool, I'm almost speechless." He craved destruction. He loved it. He cherished the attention, but he needed it now more than ever. They needed this attention to draw curious eyes and blood-lustful minds. This is what All for One suggested. "I'll have Kurogiri on standby if things get bad for you too." However, Shigaraki glanced back at Kurogiri speaking formally with Stain. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but Stain looked serious. "I imagine Akaguro's going to be too prideful to ever run away during an opportunity like this. Even if it feels wrong, I can't risk you getting captured. Understand how precious you are." He knew Midoriya had become close to his teacher and that he also had a lot of shame when it came to retreat. Sometimes his little brother needed a reminder on how crucial he was to everything, as well as reminding him that Todoroki can't be his if he's in prison. "Don't be stupid," he placed a hand, minus the pinky, on the freckled boy's head. "Be careful." "Understood," Stain told Kurogiri with a slight nod. He then turned around and unsheathed his swords, walking towards his apprentice at the edge of the water tower. Midoriya put his face mask on and let a mint glow emit from the holes for the eyes. Under his masks, there was a wide grin of mischief. He wanted to have fun tonight. "Let's get going." The first explosion, a Nomu, caused the ground to shake underneath the hero's feet. Endeavor looked towards the flames that shot up to the sky, seeing the smoke shoot in the air. He didn't even have a moment to speak before more went off. "Burnin', what do you see up there?" He shouted into his earpiece, knowing his sidekick would be able to have a greater perspective up above. "It's Nomu. And there's more than one." Endeavor gritted his teeth as another explosion went off and heard a shrieking roar following it. Burnin's voice was loud enough to be heard past the earpiece for Todoroki, Manuel, and Ida to hear. Whatever frustration in Ida's face had disappeared at the mention of the Nomu. Both he and Todoroki shared a glance, Todoroki placing a hand over the center of his torso. Feeling his ribs, he visibly became tense at the memory of all the pain he felt, having nearly every bone in his chest snap and stab through his skin from the inside. A villain pulling him away to shift the bones away from his organs from the outside. To feel his insides being moved around, the blood, the helplessness. While Manuel pulled out his phone to make a call to his agency, Ida approached Todoroki from the side, thoughtless as he took his hand from his chest to hold. The gesture came off as a surprise, making Todoroki flinch. "It won't happen again this time." I promise, Ida assured, holding his hand with both of his. He wouldn't let it happen again, not when they were fighting together for a second time. Todoroki slowly took his hand back and nodded silently in understanding. He wasn't sure what to make of the gesture all of a sudden. Usually, he had been flattered and even embarrassed. But ever since Midoriya snuck into his house, he'd rather keep a friendly distance in the nicest way possible. Both of you should focus on evacuating and protecting civilians, leave the nomus to the pros, Manuel said to both of the boys. It was best to keep them out of combat, as using quirks in public was still a fine line without a hero license. Especially if they were used to harm someone or something. Having the teenagers focus on protecting and evacuating would be safest for the law, but also safer for them as students. Don't try to fight these things. We want to keep the destruction to a minimum. Shudo, send out a signal if something goes wrong. I know you won't be careless. Endeavor instructed. Todoroki was surprised that his father was going to allow him to go off with just Ida. Wasn't he suspected of working with the League of Villains? Didn't Endeavor want to keep an eye on him? The suspicion around him must have gone down. Todoroki and Ida would engage in search and rescue tactics. As more heroes arrived on the scene, a safe area was set up with a barrier guarded by pros. Todoroki would use his ice to make slides close to burning buildings for people to slide down from upper floors to safety. They would melt quickly, so he was forced to act fast. Ida rushed around, picking up people who had been injured and delivering them to the safe zone. People would report a missing person to him, to which he would race out and search as best he could. The two were efficient and heroic in their actions, saving many lives. Just as his brother had done, Ida saw something that took all his attention away. He couldn't turn away and ignore it. How many alleys had he passed and not noticed something? A few at least. Scattered around the city, in the crevices of big buildings, some burning and some not, corpses of heroes had been abandoned. They had been cut into and butchered like animals. Some of them had parts of their insides removed. Streams of blood had been left ignored as the people begging for help and protection took the priority. No one had yet noticed the two killers taking advantage of the chaos. Not until they were spotted in the act. On his way to another search, an explosion went off in the distance, followed by more screams. They were too far to reach as they were in the center of the destruction where the nomus were. The pros would handle it. But the light from the explosion created a flash that lit up the darkness of an alleyway. He got a glimpse of a hero being held by the face against the wall by the hero killer. Rage overwhelmed him. There was so much hate. It was boiling, scalding. Remembering the sight of his brother, barely conscious in a hospital bed. To take the name Ingenium, he couldn't. Not when the hero killer was still on the streets. Stain. How quickly he turned that corner. How fast he had been, jumping and kicking himself off the wall, preparing to land a blow with his armored foot against Stain's neck. How quickly he found himself on the ground. His helmet had been forced off. He was face down in the dirt. He nearly screamed when a blade went through his hand into the ground. "You're just some kid," Stain grumbled, looking down darkly. His body was littered in blood spatter. He had tossed the hero in his grip to the side of the wall, and yet that hero could not move despite being conscious. Paralysis. "I'll kill you for Ida was about to threaten, his voice dreadfully hateful and angry. But a calmer voice through a mixer spoke over him. He's Ingenium's little brother. His quirk is jet legs. Midoriya had been sitting against the wall, examining something in his hands. He too was covered in blood spatter. Yet his gloves were drenched in red, dripping from the object he was holding. Ida was mortified to see a pair of human lungs. "Why, from the USJ. Keikosuka Ida tried to move on instinct but found himself unable to even twitch. Stain put a boot on his head, pushing his face a little further into the dirt. "You hurt to do dash. Don't even go there." Midoriya snapped back quickly but kept a calm tone. "Funny how your first instinct was to kill my master instead of saving that hero right behind you. How noble, little Ingenium. A true hero," he mocked. He then stood up and tossed the organ in his hands aside, shaking his gloved hands a bit to get rid of excess blood, and splattered a bit on the walls. "I'd personally love to take a look at what's in those legs of yours. You won't have to die if you just play nice." As much as he would love to kill him, he knew Todoroki wouldn't approve. He'd have to tread carefully. Do you know him? Stain asked, backing off but only by a step. Ida's body could only shake as he struggled to move. He's a pain in the ass, I'll tell you that. But he doesn't have to die. He did me a favor once after all. If he hadn't found Todoroki at the easy when he did, his beloved may not have made it. But he still hated the feelings the four-eyed prick expressed for his beautiful hero. Midoriya knelt down and picked up Ida's glasses that had fallen on the ground. He examined them briefly before tossing them aside. When he walks away from this, my debt will have been repaid. Turn back, little ingenium, save your legs. Next time won't be so nice. If only Ida could see the most twisted smile that was hiding behind that mask. Or the bright red eyes, craving to cut him open like a doll. Who are you? Ida asked, only glaring up at the boy kneeling above him. Those threats, the friendly way of talking like he was lying through his teeth, biting his tongue to play nice with all the other kids. It was too familiar. I know you, don't I? He had to die. He had to die right now. Midoriya's eyes widened in panic behind that mask as he reached for a blade strapped to his waist. He couldn't be found out. Not when he was this close. Before he could grab the blade, a familiar sound echoed through the alley. Midoriya quickly leaped back with Stain as ice coated the walls of the alley, a trail spiking up from the ground surrounding Ida, as well as the hero paralyzed against the wall. Ida! The little villain's heart dropped to his stomach. He knew this was going to happen. He knew out of all the heroes they were going to encounter that night, Todoroki would be one step behind Ida. Are you all right? And dashed Todoroki hurried to Ida, placing a hand on his back and looking to the other hero. Native, aren't you? Are you hurt? His heart was for the wounded first. The little villain smiled under his mask, his eyes glowing with infatuation. Even if they were on opposite sides, seeing his kind heart on the battlefield made him swoon. You went out on a search but never came back. I saw you head this way. I'm glad I came when I did. Why you kids need to get away. One can paralyze you and the other, he's got puppeteering wires in those gloves. Jigo, get help. You can't fight them, the hero known as Native choked out. Todoroki looked between Native and Ida and then the villains standing before him. You came here to help your friend. That's very heroic of you. You're not so bad, are you? Stain took a step forward, making Todoroki's eyes narrow. It didn't take a genius to know who was standing before him. He recognized the masks too. Not like the other heroes. You're not in it for the attention. You actually want to help people, unlike these two here, rushing in to fight me for revenge and for attention. Both Ida and Native shut their eyes tight hearing themselves be called out. You have a heart. One that people take advantage of. This lanky man covered in blood with a crooked face spoke such powerful words. You just want to save people. It's very kind, sweet words. You deserve better opportunities, alluring words. I know about you, boy. I know heroes have hurt you more than any villain ever has. I'll let you know, villains aren't always the bad guy. Don't listen to him, Todoroki. Ida shouted. Todoroki blinked a few times, having become a bit distracted by the hero killer's voice. These people, they hurt others. Their reasoning shouldn't mean anything after everyone they've killed. I know you didn't like Kosuke, but did he deserve what happened to him? What about my brother? Kosuke deserved it. Kosuke deserved every moment. But Ingenium, maybe not. Or maybe he did. Todoroki looked down at Ida, seeing him in such a pained and pathetic state. You're right. Todoroki mumbled. Midoriya's eyes flickered at the hesitation. But then he watched his beautiful hero raise his left arm and fire a flame directly into the sky, one big enough to make a scene, but thin enough to keep another city fire from forming. A signal. He was calling for backup. And it was then that Ida's hand flexed. Master, we should dash. Midoriya reached for Stain to try and convince him to retreat. They already killed a few heroes, they made a mark. It wasn't too early to flee. But Stain pushed his hand away. I know how important you and your identity are to Shigaraki, Fallen. It is not shameful to run away. Stain licked his lips, staring at the two teenagers and the hero before him. He looked frighteningly thrilled. I will not kill the boy. But I will not run from this fight or any fight. My conviction is stronger than any fear of persecution. He wore a wide grin, his body almost trembling with anticipation. And this boy, he really is a hero. I can't wait to see what he can do. Midoriya would not run from this fight. It was almost as painful as watching the Nomu crush Todoroki against the tree, seeing him desperate to scream but unable to make a sound. And here he was forced to fight him face to face, getting within inches of each other, but not to love. The determination in Todoroki's beautiful bicolored eyes were infatuating to see up close. The determined frustration was nothing compared to the loving obsession he had seen in him not so long ago. The grunts in pain were nothing like the sounds that had come from him the day he snuck into Endeavor's mansion. He hated it that things had to be this way. He hated that they had to be on opposite sides, that they had to fight. He wanted to be together with him already. He wanted him all to himself. Todoroki! Ida cried out as Todoroki cringed in pain. Stain went a little too far, but it wasn't enough to be anywhere near deadly. His blade had gone cleanly through Todoroki's left thigh before he twisted and pulled it out. The boy had been bruised with his right half becoming a bit frosted from excess use of his ice. But he soon became paralyzed as Stain licked the blood from his blade. At least he could stay out of the fight for a little while. Todoroki fell back in paralysis, unable to move or even use his quirk, like Stain froze the flow of power within him. This gave Midoriya the opportunity to raise his hands up and brought the wires up high. Before Ida could get to Todoroki, Midoriya entangled his beautiful hero in wires before bringing him close and keeping him out of the fight. "Don't hurt him," Ida begged, avoiding another flurry of rapid attacks from Stain. Midoriya brought his hero to him, ensnared in wires before putting him on his side on the dirt to keep weight off his leg to keep it from bleeding more. He was sure to wrap the wound multiple times in wire to compress it and keep it covered. The little villain then got on his knees behind him and leaned over to rest his cheek against the top of Todoroki's head, running bloodied gloved fingers through his hair as his hero was helpless to move. "Don't worry. I won't hurt you. I could never bring myself to," he said softly through the voice mixer. "You're safe with me. You always will be." The sheer confusion in his hero's eyes was almost enough to make him giggle. How precious. The air in the alleyway suddenly became hot. Like the air was boiling. Little to do, Midoriya looked up to see a pharaoh-looking woman on the rooftop, her hair appearing as a flame. "Burnin'." "Ida." A wave of water from a broken fire hydrant was given direction and forced into the alleyway just as Ida had his arms stabbed through multiple times with throwing knives. "Manuel. I told you not to be rash. Get off him, you little punk." In a moment of distraction, Midoriya found himself in a chokehold from Native who had finally regained the ability to move. His focus was gone. The wires around Todoroki detangled and unraveled. Ida took the chance to kick Stain in the back at full force into the wave of water that Burnin eventually blasted with a dangerously hot flame, making it scalding. He then rushed to Todoroki, taking him in his arms and running up the wall to dodge the rushing boiling water. Native pulled a leaf out of his back pocket, quickly letting Midoriya go and tossing the leaf like a needle behind the wave. He disappeared, then reappeared in place of the leaf on the other side of the water. The boiling water washed into Stain as Midoriya was just able to climb up a wall and hold on to an edge. "Master!" The little killer tried to reach for Stain with the wires of his gloves. But a wave of fire blocked his view. Looking back, he saw Native, Manuel, Burnin, and Ida holding Todoroki standing before them. It was 5 against 2. More were likely on the way. "Master, we dash. Get out of here, fallen. I'm not leaving." Stain was dripping in boiling water, standing hunched with his tongue out and a wide grin. "I will bring about a reformation." He wasn't going to give in. But it was too risky for Midoriya to stay. If either of his masks came off, or if he was captured, or if he was hurt, he could be found out. "Don't be stupid. Be careful." Midoriya tightened his eyes and turned his head away. "Dad! Don't let him get away," Ida shouted, seeing a portal appear above the little killer. Todoroki's head laid limply against Ida's chest as he watched Midoriya climb into the portal with it closing behind him. He just watched him run. He couldn't help but think about what he said. about never hurting him. He did human experimentation, a doctor. His dad could warp people. He killed Kosuka. All of you, the skies, a new voice shouted out from behind. Endeavors. Midoriya had been warped to a nearby rooftop, behind the fight where the heroes wouldn't think to look. He could watch, but he couldn't intervene. He saw Endeavor arrive with 5 more sidekicks. It was 11-on-1. Stain wouldn't be able to fight them all, especially with his skin being boiled. His master would surely be defeated and captured. And with how hard Ida hit him, his spine was likely to be damaged, maybe a few ribs too. Todoroki had burned him plenty of times. By the end of the fight, he was flustered and running on adrenaline alone. Looking up to the sky, the flying Nomu above screeched. Endeavor had been chasing it as it flew above the alleyway like it was on a mission before it was attacked. The other 2 Nomu had been done away with. It was the only one to remain, but it was already wounded, having been burned and missing one of its eyes. Midoriya was confused as to what it was doing. What was it after? And that's when he saw it dive with its talons out. Was it going to grab Stain to help him escape? Was it going to hurt Ida for holding Todoroki? Stain's eyes flinched at watching the Nomu drive down snatch Todoroki out of Ida's arms. Midoriya held his breath as he saw the Nomu dig its talons into his hero's side to keep him in its grip. But he expressed pain in his face. It hurt him. Why was it hurting him? He specifically demanded the Nomu not to. Why was it disobeying? When the Nomu flew back up towards the sky, it screeched, flying away from Shigaraki, who was watching from the water tower. What? Where is it going? Midoriya asked in a shaky tone. This wasn't right. Something was wrong with it. Kurogiri appeared beside Midoriya, holding him by the shoulders to keep him in place. The little villain was forced to watch the heroes try to reach for Todoroki as he was stolen away, unable to move from the paralysis yet. It was then he saw Stain rise up off the wall, wielding his blades to attack the monster. The doctor has been asking Shigaraki an awful lot about Todoroki. He feared his recruitment was taking far too long. The doctor's command overrides yours, Izuku. Kurogiri explained. The little villain watched in horror as his master beheaded the Nomu as its body glided down, dropping Todoroki to the ground. The doctor wanted to take Todoroki to his lab to perform the Nomu experiments on him by force. I had warned Stain beforehand, when they were talking on the water tower. I asked him to protect him if the Nomu ever strayed from your orders. Stain stood over Todoroki, turning back to look at the heroes. He said he would judge him as a real hero. He must have satisfied his expectations. He saved the little villain's beautiful hero. You fake. Stain stared directly at Endeavor with his mask having fallen off. I must make things right. His eyes were wide with bloodlust. Someone must be dyed in blood. The world around appeared to be a dark shade of red, shrouded in an evil darkness creeping in everyone's skin. I must take back what it means to be a hero. Todoroki watched from the ground from behind, his body struggling to move against the paralysis, and yet appeared entranced by every word. Come, try and get me, you fakes. Fakes, fake heroes. Todoroki looked back at his father and all his sidekicks. Fakes? The only one I'll let kill me is a true hero. A hero has hurt you for more than any villain has. A hero. A fake. Heroes lie. Never my hero. At Stain's last step forward, he froze. There was a silent snap. Something in his spine. Something in his ribs. It punctured an organ that caused his body to finally give in. On a distant rooftop, Midoriya's eyes began to water at the sight of his master being restrained. He watched Ida hurry to Todoroki, only to be held back by Endeavor's sidekicks. He wasn't allowed to get close. Having been saved by a villain such as Stain, the suspicion around Todoroki became worse than it ever had before. The attack on Hosu was a success despite the loss. Perhaps it was the loss that made it such a grand success. The destruction had been done, the power of the League of Villains was put out on display. The reports of just under a dozen lives have been taken from the hero killer were pouring into the media. Viral videos were being posted left and right. News stations were reporting the story for hours back to back. Social media had been overrun with debates and gossip. Word was getting around. It was flowing. traveling to the minds of civilians and criminals alike all over Japan. Shigaraki had looked at his phone just the afternoon after the attack. "Dabi, Stain was working with you, wasn't he?" Todoroki and Ida had been placed in separate hospital rooms for just 2 days. Both had their injuries treated, with Ida being brought into surgery. Though Ida was left in the privacy of his room, Todoroki's had police officers standing on the outside as guards. Thankfully, he had been left with his phone for entertainment, which included texting Midoriya every once in a while, even though the little villain was still interning at a different hospital. He also was allowed to have Zuzu as she rested underneath his hospital patient shirt. She did well to keep him company. While he had been texting Midoriya, however, he received a few visitors. Police Chief Kenji Tsuragami, and a few police officers at his side. Todoroki stood up, placing his phone on the bed behind him. He helped Zuzu out from under his shirt and kept her on the bed. She sat on his phone to hide it. He hoped they wouldn't take either one away. "Todoroki Shudo, so you helped take down the hero killer, Wolf?" With the head of a dog, he really was part dog. Todoroki only nodded his head as he noticed the door behind the police chief was open a crack. He could see Endeavor watching. "Regarding the hero killer we arrested, he had fairly serious injuries with burns and broken bones, and is receiving treatment under strict guard, Woof. As you are a UA student, I'm sure that you are aware that when superpowers were still becoming the norm, the police attached high importance to leadership and standards and made sure quirks were not used as weapons. And then, the profession of hero emerged to fill that gap, Woof. For an individual's use of force and power that can easily kill others, actions that normally would be appropriate to denounce, to be accepted officially is thanks to early heroes who followed the ethics and rules of the profession, Woof. Even up against the hero killer, for uncertified individuals to cause injury with their quirks without specific instruction from their guardians or supervisors is a clear violation of the rules. You, Ida, Manuel, and Endeavor must receive strict punishment." Todoroki flinched at the requirement of a punishment. That didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair. He tensed up. "Wait a minute dash." Just as he spoke with a sharp tone, police officers at the police chief's side suddenly drew their guns and pointed them at him. Zuzu's fur raised as she snarled at them, growling viciously even for a puppy. Todoroki put his hand in front of her protectively as he took a step back. If Ida hadn't done anything, Native would have been killed, he spoke calmly. But he was clearly angry. To be targeted like this? If I hadn't come, they'd both be dead. No one realized that the hero killer had appeared. Are you saying we should have followed the rules and watched people get killed? Heroes didn't work like that. Heroes saved people, didn't they? Maybe. Heroes lie. Are you saying that as long as it turns out all right, it's okay to bend the rules? It should be. Not all rules were all right. Villains weren't always bad guys. Heroes lie. Isn't it a hero's job to save people? Todoroki gritted his teeth, becoming more frustrated. Heroes were always so difficult to argue with. Always acting like they had better morals than everyone else. Heroes lie. That is why you are not a full-fledged hero yet. And you won't be if you keep up this behavior. Todoroki took another glance at the guns that were being pointed at him. He was in trouble. The cops didn't trust him. That was the official opinion of the police. And the punishment and such would only happen if this were all made public, Woof. If this were made public, you would probably be applauded by the public, but you would not be able to escape punishment. If it is not made public, the burn scars would support Endeavor being the hero who saved the day, and it would end there, Woof. Thankfully, there were very few witnesses. This violation could be crushed here, Woof. But this would also mean no one would know about your good judgment or achievements. Endeavor would get the credit. Just like always. He would always look good for the public while Todoroki's pain was kept in the background. He lied. The cops lied. Heroes lie. It's not like I have much of a choice, Todoroki muttered. Can you stop pointing those things at me? It's stressing my dog out. He slowly sat down and let Zuzu onto his lap, where she proceeded to snarl and bare her teeth at the police. The police chief raised his hand to signal the officers to put their weapons away. Where's Present Mike? Can I see him? Everyone was out to get him. He wanted to see someone he knew would be on his side. There was one hero that would support him. So you don't know? The police chief asked. Todoroki narrowed his eyes. He hadn't heard of Yamada's attack. You can't see him. He's been dismissed for health reasons and will be returning to work as soon as he's recovered. The boy was visibly disappointed as he looked down at Zuzu. He really was alone here. Surrounded by heroes and cops, people who were supposed to protect others, people to be trusted, and yet he felt terribly lonely. I'm sure you are also aware by now the severity of your position. He petted Zuzu as she cuddled up to him on his lap. Stain rescued you from a Nomu that wounded you. It sounds like an oddly familiar situation, doesn't it? Todoroki's hold on Zuzu became a bit stiffer. He had been rescued by rogue Nomus twice now by villains. Yes, he answered quietly. Did you have anything to do with the death of Kosuke Hiro? I did not. Are you working with the League of Villains? I am not, he answered clearly. They all suspected him. We're all staring at him. Such hate and distrust. He took no comfort in their presence. He didn't feel safe. He didn't want to be here. These weren't his heroes. Even your father is beginning to lose faith in you, Todoroki. Why would Stain try to protect you? He stabbed me. You call that protecting? We call it a diversion to make it look like you're enemies. Just get out, Todoroki growled. I didn't get stabbed to be accused of a crime I never committed. He didn't want to listen anymore. Just get out. And tell my father that he's the only criminal here. He knew Endeavor would hear that through the door. He wanted him to. None of you are heroes. He didn't want to be anything like them. Who the hell are these guys? Midoriya asked, coming down the stairs that very evening while wiping his face of blood splatter from another day of interning at the hospital. He found Shigaraki sitting at the bar with the hand on his face, but he was nowhere near alone. Kurojairi stood behind the counter as he usually did, preparing a glass of liquor. Or four. There were a number of unfamiliar faces at the bar. A lizard man. A showman in a mask. A buff woman. A blonde, smiling schoolgirl. But he could recognize Twice and Jiren among them. These are Shigaraki was about to answer when the blonde girl skipped right up to Midoriya with a knife in her hand. You worked with Mr. Staney, didn't you? Her eyes became locked on to the blood he was cleaning from his face. They seemed to sparkle in awe. The fallen one, right? Tell me all about him. I want to meet him. I want to stab him. She was bats hit crazy, bouncing up and down with a knife. Midoriya held her wrist in place so that she wouldn't stab him. He looked at Shigaraki questionably. These are our new comrades, brought to us by Jiren. They appeared to be inspired by you and Akaguro's actions and found us here. Shigaraki answered, taking a small sip of a shot. He was going to need a lot of alcohol to keep him going to be social with all of these people. Twice, dressed in his bodysuit, sat down next to him and patted his back. Don't start partying yet. Let's get fucking wasted. He reached for one of the drinks Kurojairi made and lifted his mask just enough to take a drink. The masked showman calmly approached the counter, leaning against it to politely raise a glass to Kurojairi. Thank you for inviting us all to meet face to face. We're honored to be working with you. At least someone seemed a little bit normal. I'm still not so sure about this, but if Stain worked with him, then I guess I can too, the lizard man grumbled, folding his arms and sitting back on the red sofa. His eyes only narrowed at Midoriya. The little villain could sense a bit of jealousy coming from him. Now don't be like that. Try to be a little optimistic. The buff woman patted his shoulder, sitting down beside him. So many people had appeared here all at once. Midoriya watched Jiren take a drink from Kurojairi and tapped it against the showman's. All of them had likely been meeting with Shigaraki while the little doctor was away at the hospital. All of them having the slightest appeal to Stain. They likely had their own reasons, their own stories, their own traumas. He would have to connect with all of them for this to be the team Shigaraki wanted. The team that he needed. But it wasn't complete. Not yet. Oh shit. Look at that. Jiren gestured to a TV Kurojairi had on in the bar. It was either stationed on a channel with no signal or the news. And the screen was a news report of a hospital having been caught on fire in Hosu. It showed aerial footage of heroes and first responders surrounding the building, rapidly escorting patients and staff out. As reporters were frantically reporting the situation, a camera zoomed in on Endeavor entering the building. Midoriya didn't think much of it at first glance, busy trying to deal with the energetic girl before him. But then something clicked in his head. Something dropped in his stomach. Fear took over. Kurogiri's phone began to ring. Todoroki would not have left Hosu yet. He's been texting him from the hospital for the past 2 days. His legs were dealt with heavy damage and he was having problems walking. But the staff would have helped him. He could have been escorted out. What floor was he on? Was he high up? How many stairs would he have to take? He could make it, couldn't he? Midoriya lightly pushed Toga away to approach the bar beside Shigaraki. He had gone so pale with his eyes wide with anxiety. He knew why Kurogiri's phone was ringing. But he didn't want his thoughts to be true. He watched the man answer his phone. He didn't say hello. I know, you try to keep your identity a secret. I think I'm going to die. Midoriya could hear Todoroki's voice on the other side with an excessive amount of background noise. The room had gone mostly silent as Kurogiri looked at everyone in the room, staring at him. He put the phone on speaker. I'm at the hospital in Hosu. It's on fire. I'm trapped and I can't move my legs anymore. I know you said to text for emergencies, but I don't think anyone's coming to get me. If you could hit you dead? It cut out suddenly. Hope you guys are ready for your first job already. We're getting ourselves another member, Shigaraki said, placing his empty glass down. All the faces, new and old, glanced at him as he pulled out his phone. Or two, he added. With a few taps of the screen, he held the phone to his ear. He let it ring for just a few seconds before he heard it click. You're in Hosu, aren't you? He smirked. Todoroki had held his wounded leg as he stumbled down the stairs of the hospital. Zuzu followed right beside him, barking loudly as if trying to get the attention of any heroes that could be inside. They're not coming, he growled in pain. Police officers had been outside his door when the fires started from the center floor. They left him there. They helped the other patients, he watched them. And they left him despite the injury done to him by Stain. We'll find a way out without them. He went over to a staircase that would have led him to the first floor since the elevators were too dangerous to use. But the stairs had flaming rubble blocking the way for them to get down. The two only managed to get down one floor as Todoroki had to hop on foot to spare himself the pain. The whole building had caught on fire so quickly. He had only been taking a nap with Zuzu when an explosion went off. It felt like multiple had gone off as the flames spread quicker than they could have been contained. The building had been engulfed before the first responders even arrived. Many of the patients from the topmost floor were evacuated efficiently with those in critical condition being taken down first. But it was almost like the staff avoided retrieving him. Like the police prevented them. They kept him locked in his room and told him that he had to wait for authorities to escort him so he wouldn't go off on his own and get lost. The window could be broken, but the flames from the lower floors made it too hot to freeze the side of the building to make an escape slide. By the time he got the door opened, the police were gone. They had abandoned him. And now he roamed the hellish hospital with just his dog. You'd think they want me to die. It'd be easier than fighting the media about arresting me as a suspect for murder, he muttered. His situation looked grim. But he kept his cool, traveling carefully and avoiding weak floors that could collapse underneath him. He did find a hole in the floor where the ceiling below had collapsed. A lot of the ceiling had turned to ash, making a safe place for him to land. So he picked Zuzu up and held her close as he slid down, landing on his side to not injure his legs any further. He was able to stand up again, though with a bit of trouble. Keeping the puppy in his arms, he continued to navigate his way out, keep her nose covered to keep her from breathing in too much smoke. Having walked for so long, his leg bleeding more and more with every step, he could tell he managed to reach the second floor eventually. The room numbers read in the 200s. A little further, we'll stay at Izuku's tonight. How much more suspicious could he get by now? All he wanted more than anything was to take a bath in that private room, to snuggle into bed with his dog and his boyfriend beside him. Maybe have a good dinner provided by his father. His father? He must have been a very kind man. Izuku, he's going to be so worried. He imagined that his beloved must have already been panicking. Todoroki had stumbled down a hall when he turned a corner, crying out in pain when his leg gave in. He knelt down, seeing it gushing blood through bandages and soiling his pants. Letting Zuzu down, he patted her head before coughing violently. The smoke was getting bad. Go make it out yourself. Let someone know I'm still here, okay? He nudged her but she only whined, biting his sleeve and trying to pull him along. A little further. Fine. He went to rise up, preparing to suck up the pain when he felt the building rumble. Behind him, he saw the ceiling beginning to collapse into the hall. In a moment of haste, he grabbed Zuzu by her collar and yanked her off his sleeve, tossing her ahead. Shit. Todoroki used whatever ice he could manage in the intense heat to create only a small barrier around himself. He laid on his stomach. The ceiling had collapsed on top of him, but he managed to protect his top half as his lower half was completely buried with debris. He struggled to pull himself out, his puppy running back to him to bite his shirt and pull. It was a fruitless effort. It all seemed hopeless. He was going to die surrounded by the thing he hated most. Go get help. Try to call someone. Zuzu let go of his shirt and snuck her head under a small gap in the rubble, digging out debris just enough to fetch his phone from the ground. It had become severely cracked, but still turned on. The puppy walked in quick circles a small number of times, having a crisis on whether to leave her owner alone or not. She only gave his cheek a kiss before making a sprint away, barking wildly and loudly. Somewhere more than a city away, Aizawa's phone was ringing. But it had been abandoned on his nightstand. It would ring repeatedly, receiving call after call. There were 5, all from the same number. But the man was laying on the sofa with one leg bent, Yamada laying on his chest with his neck wrapped thickly in bandages. The blonde had been fast asleep on top of him, snuggled safely in his arms as fingers ran through his long silky hair. On the floor beside the sofa, Shinso rested his back against it, reading more about how to use a binding cloth. He would eventually feel a pat on his head from Aizawa, a gesture of silent praise. A peaceful family sat together blissfully in the living room, leaving the cell phone abandoned in the master bedroom. So much for saving your number, Todoroki coughed, having tried multiple times and giving up. He rested his head on the floor, running out of energy to keep himself alert. He desperately tried another number. The exhaustion was overwhelming. The hopelessness. He was going to die. Alone. He caught himself smiling weakly when he heard someone answer his first attempt at a call. I know, you try to keep your identity a secret. I think I'm going to die. I'm at the hospital in Hosu. It's on fire. He gazed around at the flames becoming more and more blurry around him. The smoke must have been making his eyes water. I'm trapped and I can't move my legs anymore. I know you said to text for emergencies, but I don't think anyone's coming to get me. Abandoned. He would never have a hero. If you could you dad? Todoroki's eyes had begun to close when he dropped his phone and felt a thud close to him from the floor. Raising his tired gaze, he saw his father standing before him. Of all people, Zuzu wasn't with him either. Did he really come to get him? Dad, he almost never called him father. It was usually old man, or just his hero name. But could he have really come to save him? I can't move. My leg's fucked, he coughed, digging his nails into the floor and attempting to pull himself out again. Endeavor only watched him in silence. Help he was willing to ask for help but was cut off. You remind me so much of him, his father spoke calmly, staring down at him. He just watched his son desperately claw at the ground to try and free himself, helpless to do so. Todoroki stopped trying when he heard him speak. The potential was there. You could have been amazing, Shudo. Could have. The words triggered a memory. Just a flash. A heavily locked door had been left unlocked at home once. There was a shrine in that room. We could have worked past your rebellious tendencies. You had done so well for your ice. Your mother would have been proud to see you if she hadn't become so sick. I was grateful to see you grew up stronger than him. Todoroki weakly reached out, trying to at least grab Endeavor's boot. If he could maybe just grab onto something, but his hand was stepped on. I had so much faith. I really was proud of how far you came, Shudo. Dad, why was he talking like that? It was condescending. But he sounded solemn. But not for his son. Aren't you going to help me? When Todoroki looked up higher, he saw a hand directed toward him. It was not reaching out to him. It was an open palm, slowly building flame. The light from it reflected in his eyes more than the inferno of the burning hospital. He had been troublesome too. Getting into trouble, even illegal trouble. I let it be a phase. It was a terrible mistake. I didn't want to believe you'd go down the same path. Another memory flashed in his mind. Natsuko was leaving for college. Todoroki had watched him from peeking around a corner. He was screaming at Endeavor from the door. "You killed my older brother. Of course, I'm never coming back." Todoroki's eyes flickered as he made eye contact with his father. "You wouldn't? Dad, this fire, it wasn't affecting Endeavor. Why wasn't it bothering him? I want to go home." He tried to pull his hand out from under his boot. There was too much weight. "I won't leave again." Why was he saying these things? He didn't mean them. But he didn't want to die. He didn't want to die. "You two were close even though I tried to keep him away from you. I didn't want you to learn anything from him. I imagine he'll be happy to see you again. You'll be the same age." Todoroki's heart fell. He remembered the day after receiving his scar. He went into an empty room as if he expected someone to be there. But there was no one. He was alone. He watched a blue flame rise in his father's hand, engulfing the man's entire lower arm. Endeavor looked down, so disappointed and so sad at his son trapped halfway underneath the rubble. "Shudo, it's Dash. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Endeavor watched tears drip down onto the floor. "Dad, sorry. I want to go home." Never once had Todoroki apologized to him. Never had he begged to go home. Never had he cried for his father's love. He watched the flame glow brighter in Endeavor's hand. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die yet, Dad," and brighter. Endeavor closed his eyes and turned his head away. "I'm sorry," and brighter yet. The brightest it could get. "Dad." It went out. Endeavor clenched his fist, forcing the fire to go out. His arm shook in frustration. He couldn't bring himself to kill his son. Not a second time. Not when he was begging with such a pathetic, teary face. Todoroki felt the foot leave the top of his hand. He heard footsteps get farther and farther away. He watched his father turn his back on him, walk away, leaving him to die from the smoke, from the building collapsing, or from the fire. He put his head down to the floor, quivering, clenching his fist and gritting his teeth. "I hate you," he screamed, watching him disappear into the smoke and flames. The flames pro-hero Endeavor started. "I hate you," he choked. "I hate you." Endeavor had easily found an exit in the back of the building where fewer people had been gathered. Most had been in front of the main entrance because it was bigger and offered more people to escape at once. The back was quieter. There were fewer people to see him walk out empty-handed. There were fewer people to see someone jump inside, right past him. Just as Endeavor walked out, he felt a wind go past him as someone else leaped inside with Zuzu running in first. Someone with black hair and ragged dark clothing, skinny and lanky, nearly flew in the opposite direction into the building. The shock of seeing someone hurry inside, he turned to glance back, but the person had already become lost inside. Todoroki laid face down on the floor, flames only becoming more intense around him. He had fallen unconscious with his cheeks stained with tears. His phone had caught on fire from being left on the ground and burning rubble fell on top of it. He had been left to die. It was eventually, however, that a puppy nose snuck up to him and nudged his face with a whine. There was no response from him. "I got him." Dabi sat down in front of Todoroki, covering his nose and mouth with his forearm to keep from inhaling the smoke. He uncovered his face to place his arms under Todoroki's and pulled him while his foot kicked harshly at the fallen debris. Zuzu barked with every kick, watching her owner's body be pulled more and more out from the rubble until he was completely free. The inertia brought his limp body into the arms of a forgotten older brother, hugging onto him with his nose buried in his hair. He was held desperately tight. I'm here now, Sho. I'm here." Dabi wouldn't get a response. "Find me the way out of here." He looked to Zuzu as she made a run for it. There wasn't time to spare. From the outside, Endeavor kept an eye on the building, watching first responders and heroes tend to patients and staff. Everyone had been working efficiently and impressively as it appeared every patient had made it out with needed equipment. Though, amongst the fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars, He was confused to see a small delivery truck on the premises. It should have been past delivery hours. Endeavor, have you seen your son this evening? He hasn't been marked off the roster. A nurse had rushed up to him in the midst of his thoughts to show him a paper. Every patient had been marked as present. All except one. He was transported elsewhere upon evacuation. He made it out. Take my word for it, he lied. The nurse nodded and marked Todoroki off without a second thought. Heroes wouldn't lie. Just as the nurse walked away, Endeavor heard glass shatter from the building. Things had been breaking all night, but it was the glass breaking and a loud thud that got his attention. He watched Dabi use his upper back to break the glass from a first-floor window, breaking his fall by rolling on his side with Todoroki in his arms. Had he not been so far away and had there been fewer people to see through, perhaps Endeavor would have seen him carrying his son. That creep said a truck dash, Dabi muttered, getting to his feet with Zuzu right on his tail. With a few rapid glances, he noticed a delivery truck amongst the first responder cars. This way, he made a run for it with the puppy following close behind. There was no stopping to talk to anyone or fill out paperwork. He was getting him far away from this place. That looks like our guy. More like Frankenstein's monster. Twice appeared out from the back of the truck, raising the back of it to see Dabi on his way towards it. A puppy? Toga poked her head out behind him and immediately noticed little Zuzu running with all her speed with her tiny legs. Now, make way for them, the masked showman lightly nudged them aside to make more room for Dabi to climb up. Welcome aboard, young man. Dabi stopped to see the three in the back of the truck, confused by such unique-looking people. He found himself being helped up by the showman while Zuzu was taken by Toga. Twice shut the back of the truck from the inside and banged on the wall. The lizards a bit of a mad drive dash before anyone had time to brace. The driver went full speed and took a hard turn to leave the hospital grounds, sending everyone in the back against the wall. Toga used herself to protect Zuzu as the puppy yelped and the showman took hold of Dabi's shoulders to keep him from slamming into the metal. After the initial acceleration, the driving became a bit more smooth, letting Dabi walk to the corner of the truck and sit down. He nearly cradled Todoroki in his arms with his cheek against the top of his head. Even in an unconscious state, he was quivering. He was covered in ash and soot, debris and rubble made his hair filthy. His hospital clothes looked like rags. His bare feet were bleeding and his left leg appeared mutilated at his thigh. Dabi only sat in silence, holding him close, rubbing his thumb underneath his scarred eye. The last time he held him, he was so much smaller. I'm here, he mumbled near silently. Here, I found this while we were waiting for you. The showman came around after a few minutes, handing Dabi a black blanket. He said nothing as they both maneuvered Todoroki to have it wrapped around him protectively. Mr. Compress, if you will. A pleasure to meet you, the man greeted. It appeared the driver took a sudden hard turn and Mr. Compress put his hands against the wall on either side of Dabi to keep him from being shoved into a wall. The truck then came to a sudden halt. Someone's going to have to teach that lizard how to drive, honestly now. He shook his head in annoyance. Can you stand? Midoriya had been sitting at the bar with Shigaraki and Jiren. The little villain had his nails digging into his wrists as his eyes were locked on the TV reporting the hospital fire. Shigaraki had his focus on the same thing, though he occasionally glanced at the door and at his phone. It had been quite some time now since he sent everyone out. It was a good first test of cooperation. It was also a chance for everyone to meet each other. They should all be returning soon. And soon enough, Kurojiru returned behind the counter, making Midoriya sit up straight and look to the door. We got him and a puppy. Toga kicked open the door, holding Zuzu high in the air like an extra collectible item she found along her quest. One by one, everyone returned to the bar. As they trailed in, Midoriya ran to the sofa where he had a large set of his medical supplies set up, including a supplemental oxygen mask and machine. He began unpacking and preparing, setting up the machine just as the hospital taught him how to. A panicking mess on the inside, a calm doctor on the outside, he was efficient and skillful in his actions. By the time he looked up, he was met with bright, piercing blue eyes. They were truly a beautiful color. Intense and motionless, Dabi was staring at Midoriya with little space between them as he paused in placing Todoroki on the sofa. The little villain didn't break eye contact, but he could see the burnt skin, the staples, and the piercings. This was Todoroki's big brother. The crystal-like eyes were unmistakable. The empty stare was one he had seen so often. There was a silence from them both as Todoroki was slowly handed off, from one's arms to another's. Midoriya gulped and started by putting a supplemental oxygen mask over his beautiful hero's nose and mouth, turning on the machine to help him breathe after all the smoke inhalation. The room was silent as Midoriya worked. Some curious eyes watched him, switching between the TV and the doctor. Todoroki's left pant leg was cut off for him to carefully pick bits of charred debris from his wound with tweezers after he had removed the bandages. The lizard cringed at the sound of the bandages ripping off the wound, having become stuck to it despite being just cloth. The wound was cleaned and disinfected, leaving a sizzling sound to be heard. He redressed it cleanly with brand new bandages. Then he would proceed to wash the soot off his feet, tending to them with burn creams as the soles had been burned from walking on the burning floors of the hospital. He would dress those wounds cleanly. Afterward, he would work on washing away soot from his skin and hair, trying to clean him up for when he awoke. Dabi never took his eyes off them for a second. Not even to drink. When Midoriya was left with nothing to do except wait, Zuzu had escaped Toga's hold and joined him on the sofa. It would be just a few minutes before his beautiful sleeping hero would begin to stir. The little villain glanced at Shigaraki, taking a deep breath. This was the time. Everyone was here. Shigaraki's master's doctor had grown impatient. The heroes had abandoned Todoroki. Midoriya desired, more than anything, to be able to stop telling lies to his beloved. If there was a time to be honest, it was now. Shigaraki nodded to his little brother. Todoroki's eyes slowly began to open. It took a few blinks for his vision to clear. Breathing felt forced until he felt something be removed from his face. And then above him, he saw the most wonderful thing. He so weakly half-smiled as Midoriya leaned over him so they could see each other. Todoroki reached his hand up to hold his freckled cheek. "Izuku," he whispered lovingly. It made the little villain smile back as his eyes began to water. He had been so afraid for his life. And now he was afraid of his to-be reaction. "Hey, Shochan," he greeted back. He could feel Todoroki shift to sit up. He was going to see. He was going to see everything. Midoriya helped him up by taking hold of his shoulders and then his arm. His heart was beating harder than any drum and faster than any metronome. He brought his hero closer for him to lean against him slightly. He felt his right cheek frost over as well as his right arm. "There's no need for that, Shochan." His ice was for defense and fear. The little villain had his eyes closed, too afraid to see his beloved's reaction at the moment, seeing everyone standing before him. Surely he would recognize Shigaraki and Kurogiri on the spot. "You're safe here. With me and my family, my dad and my big brother." A few eyes glanced between Todoroki and Shigaraki. All but twice, Jiren and Dabi must have been left out of the loop on what was happening. But 2 and 2 could be put together. Dabi leaned back against the counter with his arms folded, watching the scene from the corner of his eye, head down. "If family," Todoroki repeated quietly. Midoriya nodded into the other's arm, hugging him lightly. "A villain's." Midoriya nodded again. "So Kosuke? I did it. The USJ? Your injury was an accident. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't be heard over that girl's quirk. The disappearances? Heroes and corrupted underground criminals for quirk research. It was me. Ida's brother. I took his engines out. Stain took his legs. Hosu, I didn't want to hurt you. But another Nomu went wild. Stain saved you from it before it could take you somewhere awful. That rainy day, on the roof, I decided that I wanted to become a villain to kill your father. To save you. Like you saved me. It inspired me, Shin." Midoriya had buried his face into Todoroki's arm, clinging to him desperately. It was such a weight off his back to tell him the truth about everything he had done. But in turn, a greater fear was digging its way into his skin. Todoroki had such a kind, big, wonderful heart. Was he ready to stop giving it out to people who didn't deserve it? "I did it all for you. I've loved you since the day I met you. I didn't do anything without thinking about you. He wasn't ready to look up yet. He didn't want to see his face while he, himself, had begun to cry. It was then Midoriya heard someone get up from a bar stool. He had no doubt that it was Shigaraki. We met by chance one night. I can second that he's done everything for you, his Prince Charming. We've been preparing for your arrival since day one. With his back to his newly formed party, Shigaraki barely raised his father from his face to reveal his complexion once again. Todoroki had seen him before. He had watched him argue with Endeavor about the nature of free will, guidance, and passion. He then noticed behind Shigaraki, Kurogyari had been typing on his phone. The man warped the phone to Todoroki, showing him their message history with a new message at the bottom. K. I hope my company was worthwhile to you at the USJ. I would welcome your company again at any time. Kurogyari would take his phone back. You can think about it if you like. I didn't bring you here to fight when you've fought so hard most of your life. Shigaraki continued to speak as he approached the two boys and the puppy on the sofa. You don't have to be afraid. Midoriya heard a small pat. Finding the courage to look up, he saw his big brother place a hand on Todoroki's head, minus his pinky finger, while his other hand kept his father raised, keeping his face exposed to just the two of them. We'll take good care of you here. Midoriya watched a tear fall from Todoroki's scarred eye. He felt more weight press against him as Todoroki sunk down to rest his cheek against the freckled boy's shoulder. Shigaraki's hand still rested on his head. Not all villains were bad guys. Heroes lie. Heroes were never his heroes. I'd like to stay here. I'll join you.